Chapter 1264. The King of England's Palace. The wood spirit was focused on grinding the key in his hand in the yard that he specialized in researching things. There was a box on the table, and there were already 6 different shaped keys in the grooves. There was only one groove left that was empty. He was using the hammer to hammer it while comparing it to the blueprint. He carefully forged it, and after forging it for a while, he went to the whetstone to grind it. The weather was very hot and sweat kept dripping down from his forehead, but he did not care about it at all. He kept paying attention to the engravings because the keyhole of this 7 apertures exquisite lock was very special. There were already over 100 failed keys at his feet, and this one was one of the countless, but he had to treat it seriously. Perhaps this one would succeed. The closer it was to the final crucial moment, the more careful he became. When the last carving was completed, he put the key into the water. After it cooled down, he took it out again and looked at it in the light from the window. The 12 carvings on the key appeared perfectly on the surface of the key. The depth of each carving was different. He was a little excited and immediately put the key on the drawing to compare. It was exactly the same as the one on the drawing. He immediately jumped up. Success, I succeeded. He finally completed the 7 keys to open the 7 apertures exquisite lock. Once again, he had achieved a breakthrough. At this time, the wood spirit did not care about his body. He placed the last key in the groove, and then quickly walked to the main yard with the box. The earth spirit and the fire spirit were discussing matters as they walked towards the main courtyard. When they looked up, they saw the wood spirit in a hurry. Just as they were about to call out to him, they saw that he didn't care about them at all and quickly disappeared from their sight. What happened to the wood spirit? Hualing blinked and was a bit confused. Turin replied, I think I saw him holding a box. Box. The two of them looked at each other. It wouldn't be that key, right? So the two of them sped up and entered the door. They saw the wood spirit open the box and excitedly say to his master and the little princess, This subordinate has already finished researching these 7 keys. Chu Qingyan happily stood up and walked towards the wood spirit. Her fingers touched the different shaped keys and her face was filled with surprise. Wood spirit, you're too awesome. You're really too amazing. Turin and Hualing came in and gave him a punch each. You brat, not bad. You're too capable. The wood spirit was embarrassed by the praise and laughed foolishly. At this time, Chu Qingyan smiled and turned to Xiao Su. Since the keys have been completed, can we arrange for Zijing's departure? Xiao Su heard this and looked at Turin. The earth spirit received his master's signal and immediately bowed slightly to the young princess. The follow-up has been arranged. Now, as long as we confirm the departure time, our people can go and pick up Princess Pang at any time. Chu Qingyan nodded with satisfaction. Turin had always been thorough and reliable, so there was nothing to worry about. So she asked Xiao Su, Then when do you think is a good time? Xiao Su pondered for a while, then said, It's best if Pang Zijing avoids third brother when she leaves. He's smart and sharp, so it's hard to guarantee that he'll notice something. 3 days from now is the time he'll go to Hugua Temple. Let's set it on that day to avoid any accidents. Chu Qingyan nodded in agreement. Okay, this subordinate and Hualing will arrange for people. Turin immediately left with Hualing. The wood spirit felt that his mission had been completed. If he stayed any longer, he would become a big lantern for his 2 masters. Remembering that he still hadn't made a puppet for First Master Chu, the wood spirit immediately left. Chu Qingyan was overjoyed. She turned to Jasper and said, Go to the relay station and tell Zijing to prepare. Don't let anyone else hear. Jasper accepted the order and left. At this time, only the 2 of them were left in the room. She walked in front of Xiao Su and reached out to hug his arm. Her happy mood unknowingly faded. Big Ice Cube, we'll have to send Zijing away in 3 days. I'm a bit sad. When the song ends, people will disperse. This is something that has to happen. But you don't have to be too sad. After we leave and this matter settles down, you can still meet again. Knowing that she liked the princess very much, Xiao Su couldn't help but comfort her. She raised her head and met his gentle gaze. Her heart was still a bit sad. Big Ice Cube, life is like a car. In the process of moving, there are people getting off and people getting on. We're always meeting and separating. In the end, There are only a few people left by your side. Those who travel with you will be with you until the end. He raised his hand to touch her head, a doting look appearing in his eyes. And I will always be with you. She couldn't help but reach out to hug him. Big Ice Cube, me too. Unless we're separated by death, we'll never part alive. Xiao Su reached out to hug her back and held her tightly in his arms. Unless we're separated by death, we'll never part alive? Even if we're separated by death, we'll still be together. In 3 days, General Li will arrive in the capital. We can leave by then. Okay. She couldn't help but smile at the thought of being able to leave this place far away. At the courier station, Peng Zhijing was sitting under a tree in the courtyard, lying on the stone table and flipping through a book in boredom. Luo hurried over. Princess, princess. Peng Zhijing didn't even lift her eyelids and looked indifferent. What happened? Why are you in such a hurry? Luo ran in front of her and said breathlessly, Master Yu is here. He's now in the hall talking to Lord Tori. Oh. Peng Zhijing replied perfunctorily. Luo was stunned. Princess, is this your reaction? Peng Zhijing couldn't stand her fussing anymore. She looked up and rolled her eyes at her. Then what reaction do you want me to have? This courier station isn't our home. He's here with the identity of the bridal party. How can we chase him out? So don't make a fuss. There's a new fruit here. Do you want to try it? Luo shook her head vigorously. Princess, this servant means that Master Yu will come to the courtyard to see you later. Peng Zhijing's hand paused in the middle of flipping through the book. She said in disbelief. What did you just say? Luo immediately repeated herself and said, Princess, do you want to hide for a while? Luo had heard from the princess that this young Master Yu was a two-faced and calculative person. Previously, the princess had offended him in the southern blue continent. This time, he wouldn't let the princess off so easily. Luo couldn't help but worry. At this moment, Peng Zhijing closed the book and looked past Luo at the arched door not far away. Her gaze was distant as she said, It's too late. What? Luo didn't understand. Seeing that the princess kept looking behind her, she couldn't help but follow her gaze. A figure appeared at the arched door and looked around. When he saw the two of them, he strode over while waving a paper fan. Enemies are bound to meet on a narrow road. Peng Zhijing cursed softly in her heart. Chapter 1265. After leaving Peng Huang's courtyard, Xiao boarded the carriage and slowly headed back to his prince's estate. He closed his eyes and went through the plan for 3 days later. After making sure that he didn't miss anything, he slowly opened his eyes. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of something on the couch in the carriage. He leaned over and picked it up. It was a pink handkerchief with a faint fragrance. The style was very familiar. Wasn't this the thing that little rascal usually kept by her side? It should have been left on his carriage a few days ago. At this time, the handkerchief reminded him of what had happened in the study today. Because of those insignificant women, she had suddenly run away without saying a word to him. He originally wanted to chase after her and properly correct her bad habit of running away at the slightest provocation. However, Mr. Lin's appearance interrupted him and told him some unexpected things, so he didn't have time to care about her. Now that he thought about it, the words he said at that time seemed too stiff and misunderstood her meaning. In addition, he didn't deliberately explain, so she should have been jealous at that time, right? Jealous? When this word flashed through his mind, a smile involuntarily appeared in his eyes. Where is the princess right now? Ever since the princess returned to the relay station, she hasn't left her room. Okay, let's go to the relay station. The carriage immediately turned around and headed towards the relay station. Since he hurt her heart today, then he would go and explain. If she wanted to know the origins of those women and what they did, then he would tell her. Xiao had never been someone who liked to explain his actions. However, ever since he met Peng Zhijing, he would subconsciously explain to her. Perhaps this was a way of expressing that he cared. If you didn't care about someone, then you wouldn't care about what they thought and wouldn't take their feelings into consideration. However, Xiao didn't realize that his feelings for Peng Zhijing were gradually deepening. The carriage was currently heading towards the relay station. However, at this time in the relay station, Peng Zhijing looked at the uninvited guest in front of her, and couldn't help but narrow her eyes. She saw Yu Qingxi strolling in front of her, and waving her folding fan. Her sleeves fluttered in the wind. She thought that she was the most charming and unrestrained like this. If it was in the past, Peng Zhijing would definitely turn into a loyal dog, and pounce over to curry favor with him. However, he was wrong this time. Peng Zhi sat quietly under the tree. Not only was she unmoved, she even retracted her gaze and picked up a book to read seriously. Yu Qingxi frowned slightly. Why did it fail? He was slightly annoyed. He did not believe that his charm had diminished. Your Highness, I've just arrived at Sichuan 2 days ago, and I'm not used to it yet, so I didn't come over to disturb you. Today, I thought that Your Highness might not be used to this place, so I came to ask for Your Highness forgiveness, as well as to greet Your Highness. A concerned smile appeared on Yu Qingxi's feminine face. Moreover, she knew how to use her pair of beautiful eyes to look at Peng Zhijing with a self-reproach and apologetic light. If the Peng Zhijing of the past saw Yu Qingxi like this, she would probably have long been overjoyed and giddy with happiness. It was a pity that the person standing in front of him was no longer the infatuated princess who was dead set on him. Peng Zhijing only felt that this person's eyes were twitching so badly. Could it be that he had contracted some kind of red-eye disease? She hurriedly averted her eyes, not wanting to be infected by him. However, this made Yu Qingxi think that she did not dare to look at him because she was shy, and he couldn't help but feel pleased. It seemed that she really was playing hard to get with him previously. Since official Yu has asked for forgiveness and asked for greetings, you can leave now. She planned to ignore him. Otherwise, this person would be like a grasshopper, jumping higher and higher. However, Yu Qingxi walked forward a few steps, and he could see her when he lowered his head. Why is Your Highness treating me like an outsider? Aren't you going to invite me to drink a cup of tea? I remember that Your Highness specially learned the art of tea for Qingxi in the past. Now that I'm here, can I ask for a cup of tea that Your Highness personally brewed? Yu Qingxi's eyes were so sincere that they seemed to carry deep affection, as if he was looking at his sweetheart. Peng Zhijing raised her head and looked into his eyes, but she was not bewitched by the affection in his eyes. Instead, she felt disgusted. This princess's skills are not good, so I won't embarrass myself in front of official Yu. Moreover, I heard that Miss Ro's art of tea is even better. You can go back and look for her. She leaned back, not wanting to be too close to him. This kind of distance made her feel very insecure. Yu Qingxi did not notice her small movements. In the future, she would be jealous. Her heart would be even happier, and her vanity would be even more inflated. As expected, she still had him in her heart. She was just pretending not to care. This time, Yu Qingxi's actions were even more ambiguous. He stretched out his hand to support himself on the stone table. From behind, it was as if he was holding her in his arms. And when he lowered his gaze, it happened to fall on her bright and beautiful face. His eyes trembled slightly. Why didn't he think that she was actually so beautiful in the past? Especially that pair of eyes, which were as resplendent as gemstones. So bright that they seemed to be able to speak. It's so cute to see Your Highness jealous. However, when did we become so distant? In the past, you used to call me older brother Qingxi. Ever since we came to the Sichuan, I've never heard you call me older brother Qingxi. Let's not call each other princesses and young masters anymore. How about we just be like before? Little sister Zhijing? Yu Qingxi's voice became gentler. He was already handsome, and hearing him like this made him even more attractive. But when Peng Zhijing heard these words, she felt a chill. She stood up and left his encirclement. She took a few steps back, and when she was at a safe distance, she raised her eyebrows and looked at him coldly. Older brother Qingxi? Sorry, I only have a younger brother in my family. I don't have an older brother, so don't call me little sister. Seeing that she had left his range, Yu Qingxi was a little unhappy and looked up at her. At this moment he heard her say sarcastically, "Moreover, this princess remembers that Lord Yu's eyes were in the sky in the past. He couldn't see this princess at all. But now his attitude has changed 180 degrees. This princess doesn't believe that you treat this princess differently because of my beauty, and want to go back to the same old grass." Yu Qingxi narrowed his eyes. He didn't want to admit that he was almost tempted by her beauty just now. Seeing that he didn't answer, Pang Zhijing snorted softly. But even if you want to go back to the same old grass, this princess isn't willing to be the same old grass. Also, this princess doesn't want to see you. What about you? Scram as far as you can. Don't disturb this princess's interest in reading. Before she could finish speaking, the silent person in front of her suddenly walked towards her. Because Yu Qingxi knew martial arts, his inner strength wasn't low. When he walked towards her with such pressure, she couldn't help but retreat. In the end, she had nowhere to run and her back was pressed against the tree trunk. Yu Qingxi reached out and encircled her between the tree trunk and him. Their breaths were getting closer and closer. Princess, are you still angry with me? If I promise that I won't treat you like that in the future, you. Luer had just gone down to prepare tea and snacks. At this moment, there was no one in the courtyard. She wanted to open her mouth to call for someone, but she couldn't. Now that she heard him spouting nonsense, she was very annoyed and reached out to push him. What are you two doing? At this moment, a familiar and angry voice rang in her ears. Chapter 1266. When Pang Zhijing heard the voice, she immediately recognized who it was, and happily turned around to look. She saw Xiao standing at the entrance of the courtyard. He was dressed in a slim robe and looked like a jade orchid tree. He was extremely handsome, but the anger in his eyes stunned her. At this moment, in Xiao's eyes, her hands were placed in front of Yu Qingxi's chest, looking like she was rejecting but welcoming him at the same time. Yu Qingxi was very close to her, and seemed to be hugging her. Their posture was intimate and ambiguous, causing one's imagination to run wild. At this moment, a fire surged in his heart and slowly, it seemed like it was going to ignite his entire heart. When he heard Xiao's voice, Yu Qingxi took advantage of the moment when Pang Zhijing wasn't paying attention, and leaned closer to her. Even though he didn't touch her, from Xiao's angle, it seemed like the two of them were intimately embracing each other. He had long found Xiao an eyesore. What right did such a person have to snatch away his things? Even if he didn't want them, he couldn't let others take them away. Therefore, he took the opportunity to put Xiao in his eyes. Pang Zhijing was initially happy, but when she saw his gloomy expression and felt a scorching pain on the back of her hand, she suddenly realized how intimate her and Yu Qingxi's actions were. Without thinking, she immediately pushed him away and took a few steps back to distance herself from Yu Qingxi. However, in Xiao's eyes, this action felt like she was caught red-handed trying to cover it up. She was about to explain to Xiao, but Yu Qingxi spoke before her. Princess, I didn't cherish you in the past and only now do I feel regret after losing you. Even though I know you still have me in your heart, your marriage with Prince Yi is already set. There's no turning back. I wish you and Prince Yi a long life together. When I return to Southern Song, we won't be in contact anymore. Farewell. What the hell? Pang Zhijing still hadn't recovered from his confusing words, when Yu Qingxi had already strode out of the courtyard. When he passed by Xiao, he smiled at Xiao, but it carried a hint of provocation and smugness. It was as if he was saying, even if you're the princess fiancé now, the person she likes is still me. When Yu Qingxi brushed past him, Xiao's cold aura became even more intense. When Pang Zhijing realized that she had been tricked by Yu Qingxi, her entire body exploded with rage. She wanted to find him to settle the score, but this person knew what he had done and ran faster than a rabbit. There was already no trace of him at the entrance of the courtyard. She could only swallow this loss in secret. Yu Qingxi, just you wait. See if I won't deal with you in the future. She gnashed her teeth and said in her heart. Then she looked up and saw Xiao turning around to leave. She didn't forget how angry he looked at her just now. She immediately went forward and grabbed his arm, wanting to explain to him. Don't touch me. Unexpectedly, the moment she touched his hand, he flung it away. She was stunned and almost fell to the ground from the sudden force. Luckily, she held onto a tree trunk and looked at the person in front of her in disbelief. Seeing that she almost fell, a trace of annoyance flashed through Xiao's eyes. But when he thought of how she and Yu Qingxi were exchanging flirtatious glances, his heart felt like it was being roasted, and he was extremely angry. Shouldn't you be looking for your lover? Why are you pulling me? Pang Zhijing, who had yet to recover from his previous actions, was even more confused when she heard his words. What lover? Could it be that you're talking about that scumbag Yu Qingxi? You dare to do it, but you don't dare to admit it? He looked at her coldly. Just now, you two were whispering sweet nothings to each other. Unfortunately, this prince saw it all. It's useless even if you want to explain it now. I'm very sorry. This prince has disturbed your two-person world. In the future, this prince will stay far away from you and won't get in your way. Hearing him revert to his distant self and say these words that made people uncomfortable, she went from being at a loss to being slightly annoyed. Xiao, can you not speak like this? It's so strange. I have nothing to do with Yu Qingxi. Don't misunderstand. Misunderstand? He gave a light snort, his eyes filled with disbelief. This prince believes his own eyes and also believes that he's not deaf. Everything you did and said just now, unfortunately, this prince saw and heard. Do you think that this prince will believe what you're saying? At this time, Xiao did not notice that he was actually revealing his emotions without any concealment. Moreover, the pain that came from the depths of his heart made his anger even more vigorous. Pang Zhijing thought of how Yu Qingxi deliberately got close to her just now and realized that he did it on purpose. He deliberately wanted to cause Xiao to misunderstand. She opened her mouth to explain, but she heard his frosty voice. Pang Zhijing, this prince doesn't know how love-struck and foolish you are. In the past, when we were in Southern Blue, you still couldn't see Yu Qingxi's true colors. On the way to the Sichuan capital, he already sent people to kill you. Just how stubborn are you to be so dead set on him to this extent? Should this prince say that you won't give up until you reach the Yellow River, or that your brain is hopeless? Actually, what he wanted to say was, what was so good about a heartless scumbag man? To be able to make her so infatuated. I don't like him at all, and I'm not dead set on him. You misunderstood. Actually, I really hate him. I wish I could never see him again. Seeing him this angry, she was also a bit scared, so she hurriedly went forward to explain to him. What are you saying all this to this prince for? It's not like you're related to this prince. This prince is not interested in your love debts at all. At this time, his mind was already occupied by the two of them being intimate just now. He had a belly full of anger with nowhere to vent, so when he saw her become even angrier, the words he said became even more hurtful. After he finished speaking, Xiao saw a hurt expression flash across her face. His heart became even more irritated, and he wanted to leave this place. These words made Pang Zhijing's heart tremble, as if there were many thorns pricking her heart. She was still digesting what he had just said, and the wound in her heart had not been healed yet. Seeing that he was about to leave without even looking at her, she immediately ran in front of him to stop him. She carefully reached out her hand to grab his sleeve, not daring to touch his hand. Xiao, listen to me explain. Yu Qingxi and I are not like what you think. Before she could finish, she was once again cut off by Xiao. Pang Zhijing, this king will say it again. No matter what kind of entanglement you have with Yu Qingxi, this king does not care. But if you dare to continue interacting with Yu Qingxi after the marriage, then don't blame this king for being impolite. Don't forget, you are only a chess piece in this king's plan. Squashing you to death is the same as squashing an ant. You are not the only one who can marry the princess. Xiao looked at her coldly, as if he was looking at a stranger who had nothing to do with him. She was stung by his gaze. Chapter 1267. Those words were so hurtful. Because of his words, Pang Zhijing's face gradually lost all color. Only a chess piece? Just like an ant. It doesn't have to be you. These words made her feel even more bitter and bitter than the words before. Previously, she knew that he had misunderstood her relationship with Yu Qingxi in a fit of anger. Those were unrelated, so she could understand. But these words had already exposed her position in his heart. A chess piece with no freedom. An ant, a puppet that could be replaced at any time? Xiao, in your heart, what am I? Although this was the truth, when she thought about how he had been so obedient to her during this period of time, it was like giving a person walking in the desert a glimmer of water. So she still didn't believe it and couldn't help but ask. Pang Zhijing, Other than that marriage contract, we have nothing to do with each other. Could it be that you still have extravagant hopes for this prince? Xiao said coldly. So that glimmer of water was only a mirage. It was so beautiful, but it was only a mirage. It was like giving hope, but then personally destroying it. He was cold-blooded and emotionless, iron-blooded and heartless. If he didn't have a motive, how could he be so sincere to someone? She laughed mockingly in her heart. She clearly knew that he was this kind of person, so why did she still have hope for him? After Xiao finished speaking, he saw her pale face and felt very regretful. But he also felt that he was very unfamiliar at this time, as if he was a tiger that could explode at any time. This feeling was very uncontrollable. He had to leave this place to be able to clearly see what was wrong with him. So he looked at the small hand grabbing his sleeve and ordered with a cold face, "Let go." Hearing his unfamiliar and cold voice, Peng Zhijing slowly lowered her head. She felt like something in her heart was slowly cracking, and then shattering bit by bit. She felt that this thing called happiness, after coming here, was always very far away from her. The more she wanted to grasp it, the more she couldn't grasp it. Her originally glossy fingertips turned white. She slowly let go of her fingers and watched as the piece of robe fell from her fingertips. Her lips slowly curved with a faint self-mockery. When Xiao felt the force on his sleeve disappear, he didn't feel relaxed. It was as if he had lost something in his heart, empty and without any sense of strength. However, he quickly suppressed this strange emotion with an invisible hand. Then he glanced at her, who had her head lowered, and finally strode away without looking back. When he was about to walk out of the courtyard, Peng Zhijing raised her head. She only saw that piece of robe fluttering in the air, and then it disappeared along with its owner. For some people, if they were destined not to have them, then they should not approach them at the beginning. If they approached them, then they should not go deeper. If they went deeper, then they should not be tempted. If they were tempted, then they should not miss them. She had wanted to explain to him that she no longer treated Yu Qingxi the way she did in the past. But there was no need, because he didn't listen. And she didn't have any desire to explain herself. At this moment, Jasper was brought in by Lu. Lu didn't notice that something was wrong with her master, and skipped over. Princess Lu went to the kitchen to bring desserts and saw Sister Jasper on the way back, so I brought her in. She said she had something important to tell you. Jasper stepped forward. Princess, my young miss asked this subordinate to bring you a message. Peng Zhijing restrained the emotions on her face. Although she was still a little lonely, she was much better. She immediately said, "Then invite Miss Jasper Indiana. Lu guard the door. Don't let anyone in." Lu nodded obediently. She then brought Jasper into the room. Jasper clearly felt that something was wrong with Peng Zhijing, but as a subordinate, she didn't have the right to ask. Thus she shut her mouth. After Lu closed the door and cut off the sounds outside, Peng Zhijing turned and asked, "Miss Jasper, what message did your master ask you to bring?" Jasper looked around. After making sure that it was safe and no one was eavesdropping, she said with relief, "My master asked this subordinate to tell you that the 7 keys of the exquisite lock have been forged. Your freedom is just around the corner. 3 days later, Prince Yi will go to the Hugua Temple. We will rescue you out of the city on that day." Because of the serious trauma in her heart, she should have been very surprised and happy to hear this news. However, she was only calm and relieved. "Did your master say how to rescue me? How should I cooperate with you?" Jasper nodded and continued. 3 days later, our people will disguise as the coachman in the courier station and take you away. Then we will take you out of the city to the suburbs. At that time, we will disguise it as a frightened carriage. You will fall from the carriage and die from disfigurement. Of course, we have already found a substitute. Peng Zhijing heard this plan and felt that there was no problem. However, this substitute. Seeing through her thoughts, Jasper explained, "This substitute is a corpse. Don't worry, we won't hurt the innocent." She was finally relieved. "Then I will have to trouble you at that time," she said gratefully. "This is all designed by my master. You can tell my master face to face when you have the chance." Jasper replied. Peng Zhijing nodded, but frowned slightly. She was a little worried. Did your master say where to send me? She was a little worried that she would never see Qingyan again. Jasper shook her head. My master said that in order to avoid trouble, you will be sent to a place far away from the capital city. However, I don't know the specific location. My master also said that after the dust has settled here, you can go anywhere you want. Pang Zhijing nodded. That's good. If my identity is discovered, all of this will be in vain. Princess, don't worry. My master has also arranged several guards for you. They are all first-class experts and will protect your safety. As for the exquisite lock, because there are many eyes and ears in the relay station, we are afraid that you will be discovered if you unlock it. So after 3 days, when you get on the carriage, our people will naturally give you the key. After Jasper left, Pang Zhijing's ears were still echoing with her words. Once the exquisite lock was unlocked and she left, she would regain her freedom and fly away. She would no longer be restrained by others and be a useless puppet. She sat on the bed, her fingers unconsciously caressing the 7 orifices exquisite lock on her ankle. She took off the cloth, revealing the exquisite anklet. The crisp sound of the bell spread out in all directions. She fell into silence because of the sound of the bell. Freedom was already within reach. However, she was not happy at all. Perhaps it was because Xiaoho's words today had hit her too hard. But there was already no connection between them, so what was the point of thinking so much? If she didn't explain today, she probably wouldn't have the chance to say it again. The secret love hidden in her heart might become her secret. So be it. Since she was going to leave, there was no need to torture each other with beautiful memories. Perhaps if he knew that she was dead, he wouldn't even bat an eyelid. This might be the best ending. She closed her eyes and a tear fell from the corner of her eye. Chapter 1268. After Jasper returned, she truthfully reported her conversation with Pang Zhijing at the relay station. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but smile after hearing the report. It seems that this little girl also doesn't want to part with me. This makes me feel better. After hearing this, Jasper felt that her master treated Pang Zhijing differently. She took the risk of sending her away from the capital. If this was exposed in the future, she would be going against the entire southern Song, Sichuan and Prince Yi. She thought for a moment and said, Master, this subordinate saw that the princess seemed to be in low spirits just now. She seemed to have lost her soul. I don't know what happened. Hearing this, Chu Qingyan couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. She put down the teacup lid in her hand and pondered for a moment. When you entered the relay station, did you see anyone enter the princess courtyard? This subordinate didn't see anyone. At this point, Jasper immediately added, Lu said that Yu Qingxi and Prince Yi arrived at the courtyard one after the other, and left one after the other. Yu Qingxi? Who is this person? This name sounded familiar to her, but she couldn't remember who it was. Jasper recalled Lu Er's introduction. He is the Southern Song official in charge of the bridal procession this time. His position isn't low. He used to be the person that the princess liked, but he didn't like the princess and was disgusted by some of the princess actions. But today, for some reason, he suddenly thought of looking for the princess. Chu Qingyan blinked as she pieced all the clues together, and imagined a melodramatic drama in her head. If all of this was based on the fact that Xiaoho cared about Zhijing, then Zhijing and Yu Qingxi's meeting caused Xiaoho to misunderstand, causing Zhijing to be unable to explain herself. Then the two of them quarreled because of this. In this way, the matter had an answer. If this was the case, it would be a very sad thing for Zhijing to have such a thing happen on the eve of their parting. Who wouldn't want to leave a good impression on the other person before leaving? What a pity. But all of this was just her guess. Alright, let's not worry about this for now. Send someone to monitor the relay station. I guarantee that nothing will go wrong. However, Chu Qingyan didn't know that her guess was not far from the truth. Jasper immediately accepted the order and went to work. As soon as Jasper left, Xining came in with a letter in her hand. Mistress, the guard outside said that someone sent this letter to you. Xining handed the letter over. As she took the letter, she asked, Did they say who sent the letter? Xining shook her head and said strangely. The guard said that the man left immediately after delivering the letter. He didn't say anything else. After hearing this, Chu Qingyan opened the envelope with a puzzled expression, only to see a piece of paper with an orchid base. She opened it and saw that it said, "See you at Huifeng Tea House in the afternoon," and signed with the word month. She didn't need to read the content. Just by looking at the handwriting, she could tell at a glance that it was Dong Ting's handwriting. However, just as she was about to put down the envelope, a few orchids poured out. She pinched the petals, and there was still a rich fragrance that made people feel relaxed and happy. She couldn't help but laugh. Only this guy could make such a scene. However, this fragrance reminded her that the scent on his body seemed to be orchids. Who would have thought that such a devilishly charming person would have a noble and proud orchid fragrance on his body? Just thinking about it didn't match. However, if he were to stand like a normal person, there would be an indescribable elegance to him. Seeing her mistress smile helplessly, Xining couldn't help but ask curiously, "Mistress, what's written on it?" "Dong Ting asked me to catch up. I have to go out later," she said as she put away the letter. Just as she finished speaking, a voice sounded from outside the door. "Where are you going?" She turned around and saw Dabing walking in. She couldn't help but wave the envelope in her hand. "A friend invited me. I'll go out in an hour. You can take care of dinner yourself." "Friend?" Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. "Higashio Motetsu?" Her eyes lit up in surprise. "Dabing, you guessed right. That's right, it's Dong Ting." Xiao was slightly surprised. This was an analysis, not a guess. The little fellow's friends in the capital could be counted on one hand. The few closest friends didn't even need to write a letter. They directly came to her. The people she met at the banquet and Hugua Temple were all women. Generally, they would use an invitation card instead of a letter. Therefore, after eliminating the possibility, there was only Higashio Motetsu left. However, Xiao didn't have a very good impression of this potential love rival. This was because the Moon Palace couldn't get away from the few times that the little fellow had been schemed against. Perhaps he didn't participate, but it didn't mean that he was innocent. Moreover, the Moon Palace had done a lot of dirty things during this period of time. They had done a lot of outrageous things for the right minister and consort you. This made Xiao even more worried about the little fellow's trip. "Do you need me to go with you?" Chu Qingyan was playing with the orchids, thinking about how to put them in the pages of the book. When she heard Dabing's words, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I'm just going to see a friend. Don't be so nervous. And you've forgotten what happened last time. If it weren't for Dong Ting, I'm afraid I wouldn't be your fiancé now, so don't worry." That being said, Xiao still had a knot in his heart. It was like putting his most cherished treasure in front of a greedy hunter. He felt like a sheep in a tiger's mouth. He said that he wouldn't interfere with her circle of friends, respect her privacy, and wouldn't tell her what to do with her life. Now he felt a kind of unspeakable bitterness. However, he knew that the little fellow had a sense of propriety. After knowing that Higashio Motetsu stood on the opposite side of them, she was still willing to be with him. She must have her own ideas. He believed in her. After seeing Dabing's expression change, he finally returned to normal. She knew that Dabing wouldn't stop her or follow her to the tea house. She said happily, "Then I'll change my clothes." "Change clothes?" "No." He immediately denied it. Why? Not only Chu Qingyan was surprised, but Xining was also a little confused. If she went out to see Higashio Motetsu and changed her clothes, wouldn't he see a better side of the little fellow? Although it was already very good now, he still felt very uncomfortable. The little fellow could only show that side to him. But at this time, in the face of the little fellow's suspicion, he could only casually make up an excuse. "Your clothes are already very good. You don't need to change them. It's too troublesome. It takes time and energy. It's impolite to let your friend wait for a long time." Which girl wouldn't be happy to be praised? And it was her sweetheart. Chu Qingyan blushed slightly. "Then I won't change. Although it's still early, I can go out in advance to wait for Dong Ting." After that, she said goodbye to Dabing, and then called Xining and Jasper to go to the courtyard. Xiao, who stayed in the room, twitched the corner of his mouth. Why did he say that sentence just now? Chapter 1269. However, the little guy had already walked far away. At this time, Xiao Su called out, "Huling, Master, do you have any orders?" This subordinate just saw the little princess and her entourage go out. He had just returned from outside and successfully completed his master and the little princess's task. As soon as he entered the door, he was summoned by his master and reported the little princess's whereabouts. "Today's weather is good, let's go out for a stroll." Xiao Su looked at the dark clouds above his head and said without changing his expression. Huling also said without changing his expression, "Master, where do you want to go?" "There's no place to go, just follow behind Ian." Huling swallowed his saliva. Since he was together with the little princess, his master's ability to lie through his teeth had increased day by day. He was almost on par with the little princess. "Yes. Remember, don't let Ian find out that we are following behind." "Yes." Huling snickered in his heart. Where did the little princess go that made his master so worried that he had to secretly follow her? But he definitely didn't dare to say it in front of his master, otherwise he would be beaten. Thus, Chu Qingyan slowly walked forward with Jasper and Jean Xian, not knowing that they were being followed by a big tail. The Xiao Qi, who was hiding in the dark, began to struggle with Xiao Su who was tailing them. "Sui, Su Air, what does His Highness want to do with Master? Should we tell Master?" "Su Air, His Highness definitely won't hurt Master. He loves Master too much. Not to mention that His Highness used to be our master." "Su Air, but the current master is our master." Su Air, Su San and all the Xiao Qi fell into silence. To tell or not to tell? But the one in front was their master, and the one behind was also their master. So tangled, so contradictory, so struggling, so painful. Forget it, everyone unanimously decided that they didn't see anything, so there was no need to struggle anymore. Yes, that's it. If Chu Qingyan knew that her howling cavalry had struggled for so long to reach such a conclusion, she would probably want to throw them into the Fuli mountain range for training. Because it was still early, Chu Qingyan took them to the stalls. For the past few days, she had been staying in the prince's mansion, and did not go out much. Grass was about to grow on her head. Now he was like a runaway pony, shuttling back and forth between the various vendors. Because she was wearing a veil hat, no one knew who she was. She didn't have to worry about her identity to restrain her words and actions, so she acted more freely. Xiao Su, who was following them from a distance, was also wearing a veil hat. However, the noble aura that he exuded and the perfect proportions of his broad shoulders and narrow waist made many women who were passing by stop in their tracks. However, the other party did not pay any attention to them at all. His gaze was fixed on the person in front of him. Those women also followed his gaze, only to see a vast sea of people. They didn't know which one he liked. At this time, Xiao Su was coldly staring at those people who were secretly looking at his little fellow. He knew that no matter if the little fellow revealed her true appearance or covered her face, she still had a kind of beauty that people could not ignore. This kind of beauty was not something that could be created through clothes, hair, or jewelry. It was an elegance that came from within. So even if her true appearance could not be seen, she could still receive all kinds of greedy and admiring gazes as she walked. But the little fellow did not notice that Xiao Su was fiercely glaring at those people. His people, he did not even allow others to stare at them. As such, those who had pretended to approach Chu Qingyan unintentionally suddenly felt an eerie cold wind blowing from behind them. They couldn't help but take 2 steps to the side, and that feeling disappeared. However, the moment they got close to Chu Qingyan again, they would feel as if their entire body had been frozen. It really was strange. In the end, other than women, there were no men around Chu Qingyan. Seeing this result, Xiao Su was satisfied as he continued to follow her. Huling stood on the side and saw the entire process. He unconsciously swallowed. This kind of master was very good, very strong, and very scary. Only the little princess could make his master reveal such an unusual appearance. He really wanted those people who said his master had a paralyzed face to see that his master was normal. The little girl happily jumped from one stall to another. She looked very lively and energetic, which made Xiao Su, who was paying attention to her, a little spellbound. He was used to the little fellow's calmness in managing the food, her gentleness in treating the servants, her steadiness in taking care of her parents, and her calmness in the face of danger. He had almost forgotten that she was still a child not yet 16. Maybe a girl at this age was not suitable to be called a child, but seeing her this lively and happy, he finally realized that this was what she should be like at her age. Over the years, he had faced too much pressure. Not only did he have to deal with the capital, he also had to protect his fief and the secret of the Fuli mountain range. Unknowingly, the little fellow had also been affected by him, slowly hiding the nature that her age should have. She had gone through life and death with him, entering and exiting the gates of hell several times. But she had never complained or been afraid. Only at the moment of life and death would she show reluctance and worry. He suddenly felt that he owed her too much over the years. He couldn't create a protective barrier for her, and he had to let her live in fear, never having a sense of security. Every time he saw her reveal a rarely seen childishness, Xiao Su's heart would feel a deep sense of guilt. He suddenly stopped in his tracks. Hualing was walking when he almost bumped into his master's back. He immediately jumped away and poked his head out from behind, asking in a confused voice, "Master, the tea house is in front." This subordinate saw the little princess go in. "We need to hurry up and book the room next to theirs. That way, it will be easier for you to supervise." No, it's to accompany the little princess." Yeah, he almost spilled the beans. He hoped that his master wouldn't take it to heart. He didn't want to increase his training tomorrow. Xiao Su slightly lowered his eyes. There was an indescribable light hidden in his dark eyes, and it was impossible to see his current mood through the veil. "Let's go back." Hualing, who was thinking about what position he should use to eavesdrop, was suddenly dumbfounded. "Master, we finally managed to follow." A sharp gaze shot over, and Hualing immediately shut up. He would do whatever his master said, and he would obediently stand on the side as the background. Xiao Su turned to look at the tea house and revealed a faint smile. Since he said that he would give her enough freedom, then he could not go back on his words. The only happy time she had, he could not take it away from her. Xiao Su looked away and suddenly turned to a corner of the tea house, releasing his internal strength. Su Yi and the others were scattered all over the tea house, silently guarding their master. At this time, a wave of pressure came over, making them tremble slightly. Then at the same time, they met His Highness's gaze, which was asking them to take good care of their master. They immediately nodded and swore to protect him with their lives. Xiao Su looked away again and gave orders before leaving. "Pay close attention to when General Li enters the capital." Hualing paused. This sudden sentence he immediately understood. His master was becoming more and more impatient to leave with the little princess. Didn't this mean that they would soon have a little master? The corners of his mouth curled up, and he immediately agreed cheerfully. His footsteps fluttered as he followed. Chapter 1270. Sitting in a tea house with an open window facing the street, a person was currently standing there. Higashio Motetsu looked down at the black figure slowly disappearing into the crowd. He originally wanted to see the little girl arrive in advance, but he didn't expect to see Xiao Su following behind her. A subtle smile appeared on his pale face. In this world, the only person who treated the little girl with the most sincerity and without any reservations was him. Everyone thought that the undefeated war god Bloodthirsty was heartless, but when a cold-hearted person was moved, they were the most affectionate. To be able to go to this extent for a woman, that was true love. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. He guessed that the little girl was about to arrive. He closed his eyes and circulated his internal energy. His pale face was forced to turn red by the circulation of his internal energy. Then it slowly became rosy, without a trace of illness. He ordered Xuanqi Zimo to open the door while he continued to lean against the soft couch under the window. His expression was languid as usual. Chu Qingyan didn't know that she had been followed the whole way. Her footsteps were light as she entered the room. When she saw him, she immediately put on a stern expression. When Higashio Motetsu saw her expression change, he thought that it was because he hadn't been able to cover up his complexion. Just as he was about to circulate his internal energy again, he saw her angrily walk in front of him. She slammed the small tea table on the couch. "If you don't give me an explanation for what happened last time, I won't drink tea with you." It was completely like a child throwing a tantrum. If you don't tell me, I'll break off all relations with you. It was a different approach, but it had the same effect. Higashio Motetsu sighed in relief. So it wasn't because of her complexion. However, her words caused him to slightly knit his brows. The little girl was talking about an explanation. Was she talking about the poisoning incident from 2 days ago with Huang Yi, or the falling into the water incident before that? He realized that in this short period of time, the Moon Palace had already made a move against her so many times. When he wasn't aware, did they make a move against her? When he thought of this, his mood became somewhat gloomy. When she first came in, she only wanted to scare him. Who told him to always disappear without a trace? Looking for him was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But looking at his expression, it seemed that something was wrong. Chu Qingyan immediately retracted her questioning look and asked worriedly, "Hey, are you all right? Is it because you disobeyed me and got scolded for falling into the water last time? Did I poke at your sore spot? If so, I apologize." She was a flexible person. When it came to her friends, no matter who was in the wrong, she would definitely be the first to apologize. Someone once said that in a relationship, the person who bowed down first could tell who cared more. Hearing her concerned and nervous voice, he felt the deep wounds in his heart, as if they were surrounded by warm spring water, nourishing his heart that was full of holes bit by bit. The little girl was right about one thing. He was indeed punished, but he wouldn't feel sad about it. Higashio Motetsu raised his head and looked at the person who was looking at him with a half-bent waist. He smiled slightly and suddenly, it was as bright as the sun, almost blinding her eyes. What could happen to this young master? I just wanted to trick this little girl to see if you would fall for it. As expected, you still care about this young master. Just as he finished speaking, a bump appeared on his head. Chu Qingyan retracted her hand and turned to sit by the table. She was quite a distance away from him before she slowly said, "Looks like you're quite free. Then answer my question. What exactly happened with falling into the water? Why were you in the palace? Were you the mastermind or the accomplice?" She was clearly asking about his innocence, but the little girl gave people the feeling that she was just casually asking about it. She had always been intelligent, so how could she not guess? Don't you already have the answer in your heart? Higashio Motetsu twirled a strand of hair around his shoulder around his finger, and played with it, giving her a devilish smile. But in her eyes, this scene became a coquettish gesture. She couldn't help but facepalm. Why did a handsome man have to make such a gesture? He simply didn't give women a way out. She regained her composure and said with a faint smile, "All right, then I'll guess. You're only responsible for saying yes or no." This sounded like a pretty good game. Higashio Motetsu agreed without hesitation. "Consort, you set up this trap for me?" "Yes. Consort, you and the Moon Palace sect are working together." "Yes. Consort, you wants to use the Moon Palace sect's influence to pave the way for Xiao Ran?" "Yes." "Were you coerced by them to help them?" Higashio Motetsu was about to say the answer without hesitation, but he stopped at the last moment and swallowed the words. He looked at the person who was calmly staring at him in shock. After a while he finally asked, "Little girl, are you trying to trick me?" The words from before were just a prelude. Her last question was her true motive. What shocked him the most was, how did she see through it? He remembered that after leaving Jiangnan, they had very few opportunities to meet. Moreover, he had hidden it so well that it should have been impossible for her to find out. Chu Qingyan crossed her arms and looked at him coldly. "But you seem to be very vigilant. Are you afraid that I'll discover your secret? Were you really coerced into doing this?" Fortunately, he had reacted quickly and didn't fall into her trap. Thus, he relaxed his body and lay down like a softie. He supported his cheek with one hand and looked at her lazily. "Do you think that someone like this young master would be coerced into doing something? Little girl, can you stop joking around? This isn't funny at all." Chu Qingyan narrowed her eyes and tried to determine the truth of his words. However, the face in front of her was too devilish and impeccable. She couldn't tell whether he was telling the truth or not. That's right, this person was so cunning. He was the one who schemed against others. How could he be coerced? Thinking of this, she relaxed. All right, I won't joke around with you. Oh right, didn't you want to treat me to tea? Where's the tea? Where are the refreshments? Hearing her impatient glare at him and no longer ask the question, he breathed a sigh of relief again. He clapped his hands and soon, someone came to serve tea and refreshments. The tea here is not bad. Try it. He raised his hand and gestured. Chu Qingyan picked up the teacup without hesitation and placed it under her nose to take a whiff. The fragrance was rich and refreshing. She took a sip and found that it was warm and refreshing. She nodded and said, "This is good tea." Higashio Motetsu took out a folding fan from somewhere and fanned himself. He said proudly, "How can it be bad if it's recommended by this young master?" Chu Qingyan stared at him in amusement. He was really going to open a dye house just because she gave him some color. However, she wasn't going to argue with a proud child about this. At this moment, Higashio Motetsu saw her and clapped her hands. The servant girls standing on both sides of her stepped forward and placed the things in their hands on the table before respectfully retreating. Chapter 1271. These are. Ever since the little lass came in, his attention had been on her, and he had not noticed that these servant girls were holding things. "It's impolite not to reciprocate," she said with a smile. Her eyes were bright, and specks of light flickered in the depths of her eyes, causing people to sink into them. Higashio Motetsu greedily looked at her pretty face and said carelessly, "Oh, what's that?" Chu Qingyan did not notice his actions. Her finger tapped on the box and she said with a smile, "Won't you know when you open it?" Hearing her words, Higashio Motetsu looked at the boxes on the table and interest flashed through his eyes. He stood up and walked towards the tea table. Walking in front of the first box, he looked at the little lass who was urging him with her hands on her cheeks. He bent his lips and opened it. When he saw what was inside, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. This. He took out a folding fan with gold filigree. To be more precise, it was made of gold filigree. He slowly opened the fan and saw a picture of a blooming lotus flower with several carps playing under the lotus leaves. It looked very lifelike. This was not the main point. The main point was that the lotus flower was hollow, but when the sun shone on it, he found that it was not really hollow. There seemed to be a thin and transparent cloth in the middle, like the wings of a butterfly. When it was fanned, there was a sweet fragrance that assailed his nostrils. The wind was very strong and did not lose to any folding fan. When he held this folding fan in his hand, although it felt lighter than other folding fans, its value was far higher than any of the fans he had seen. It was priceless. Higashio Motetsu turned his head to look at the person who was looking at his expression with interest. "Little lass, is this a gold filigree fan? At least you know what's good for you. Not bad. This is what you people who pretend to be cultured use. I know you like to use fans, so I spent a lot of effort to find this one. It's better than the one I gave you before." Chu Qingyan felt a sense of accomplishment when she saw that he couldn't bear to part with it. She smiled and said, "It's fine." Higashio Motetsu looked at her and sighed with a smile. "No matter what it is, as long as it's from you, I will cherish it." Even if it was a stone, he would take good care of it. The seriousness in his voice made her slightly stunned, and then she revealed a brilliant smile. He was indeed her good friend. It felt good to be treasured like this. "There's also a box here. It's filled with your favorite food that I bought on the way here." As she spoke, she opened the lunchbox. The box was filled with all kinds of pastries. She knew that he didn't like sweet things, so she had bought salty ones. He stared blankly for a moment. These were all things that he had inadvertently mentioned when he was eating. He didn't expect the little girl to still remember them. In his heart, an indescribable emotion suddenly welled up. It was as if these colorful colors were embellishing his pale white world and flashing in his sky. "Why don't you try a piece and see if it tastes like jiangnan? I've never eaten these before, so I don't know if they taste like jiangnan." She handed him a pair of chopsticks and smiled. Under the urging of the little girl, he took the chopsticks and put a piece into his mouth. It melted in his mouth, and the stuffing was delicious. Although it was not as good as the local delicacies of Jiangnan, it was the best he had eaten in the capital. Moreover, it was brought to him by the little girl, which made it even more delicious. Is it good? Seeing the smile on his face, she knew she had bought the right thing. She took a piece and put it in her mouth. Instantly she exclaimed, "It tastes really good. I've decided to get a piece of this flavor in the future." Seeing her greedy little kitten appearance, his heart softened, and he couldn't help but eat a few more pieces. Beside them, Xuanqi Zimo was trembling with fear. The young palace master's body was not in the right condition to eat these things, but he had received a warning from the young palace master not to act rashly. He could only stand there anxiously. It was easy to get sick of eating too many pastries. Chu Qingyan poured a cup of tea for herself and Dongting to get rid of the grease. Chu Qingyan hugged the teacup and said with some confusion, "Oh right, why did you suddenly want to see me today? Aren't you afraid that the people behind you will find out and investigate our past? They'll follow the clues and think that we're in cahoots." When Higashio Motetsu heard this, he chuckled. "Do I have to give a reason every time I look for you? Then what should I give you? Tell me that this young master misses you and misses you like crazy. How about that?" Chu Qingyan glared at him in annoyance. "I'm being serious with you." Unexpectedly, Higashio Motetsu's reply was even more shameless. "I'm also being serious with you." She had already given up on communicating with him. He was too damn hard to deal with. Seeing her look of hopelessness, Higashio Motetsu couldn't help but smile. If those girls in the capital saw that seductive look of hers, he was afraid that the doorstep of his family's marriage proposal would be trampled to pieces, and the sachets thrown by the girls would probably be enough to smash him to death. Xuanqi Zimo grumbled inwardly. Fortunately, the two of them were wearing veiled hats to hide their identities. However, when they met someone they knew, they would usually remove the veil and reveal their true faces. "All right, I'll stop teasing you. I heard that you'll be leaving the capital in a few days, so I took advantage of the good weather today to ask you out to catch up." Chu Qingyan was slightly surprised. "How did you know that Big Ice Cube and I were leaving?" "That's because this young master is omnipotent." Higashio Motetsu smugly waved his newly obtained golden silk fan proudly. "Speak human." Higashio Motetsu rubbed his nose. "When your family's highness left the imperial study, leaving the capital was no longer a secret. You have to believe that in the imperial palace, unless it's a secret, no matter how small the matter is, it can't be hidden, let alone such a big matter. Of course, not many people know about it." Chu Qingyan sighed in relief, but his next words almost choked her to death. "But we already know what we need to know," Higashio Motetsu lazily said. This was the truth. He needed to remind the girl that the Moon Palace wasn't the only one hiding in the dark. So he had to tell her to be more careful and vigilant. "Then isn't it a secret?" She pursed her lips. "You could say that. Although the Emperor has kept it a secret, the news has already spread in private. It's just that it hasn't reached your ears yet." Higashio Motetsu was still leisurely waving his fan. From time to time, he would caress the patterns on the fan as if he couldn't bear to part with it. However, for some reason, the redness on his face had begun to fade. However, Chu Qingyan didn't notice this. Her mind was completely focused on the news of them leaving the capital. If they know that we're leaving, then they also know that Big Ice Cube doesn't want to fight for the throne. Will they stop targeting us? Not necessarily. Chapter 1272. When Higashio Motetsu heard this, he couldn't help but find it funny. How could things be so simple? "Why? We've already left. Don't tell me they still want to kill us all?" Chu Qingyan angrily clenched her fists, a wave of anger spiraling in her heart. Her angry little face lit up, as if it had lit up her entire face, making her even more lively and beautiful. He shifted his gaze from her face to the golden silk fan in his hand and chuckled. "Little girl, do you know that there's a method called cutting the weeds and removing the roots to prevent future trouble? You think you've left, but it doesn't mean that others will think you've simply left. They're more worried about your backlash, so it's better to strike first." She was stunned. Dongting's words were not without reason. Sensing her emotions, Higashio Motetsu turned his eyes, his beautiful face revealing a comforting expression. "What do you have to worry about? The King of England is not to be trifled with. Didn't you fight a bloody battle with him? Don't you know his strength?" Although he didn't want to mention this person, In order to comfort the little girl, he could only bring him up. When Chu Qingyan heard this, her entire face lit up even more. She clenched her fists, her eyes full of trust, then nodded towards Dongting and smiled. You're right, even if there are thorns and wild beasts in front of us, big ice block and I will not be afraid. If we meet gods, we'll kill gods. If we meet Buddha, we'll kill Buddha. No one can stop our footsteps. The person in front of him exuded a confident glow. The light that burst out from her eyes made people ignore her appearance, only seeing the vast and domineering brilliance that was like a river of stars. It made his eyes blur slightly. He couldn't help but lower his head, a trace of sadness flashing in his eyes. This kind of woman, competing with the moon for splendor, competing with the flowers for beauty, it was probably impossible to find another woman in the whole world who was so radiant. Xiao was really lucky. Yes, even if you encounter danger, you can overcome it. He smiled and said, Of course, don't you know who I am? After the nervousness, she was only left with mischief. Higashio Motetsu couldn't help but smile. Miss Chu, don't tell me you've forgotten your own name? Chu Qingyan couldn't help but roll her eyes. This joke isn't funny. But after saying that, the two looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh. Friends are like this. No matter how long they haven't seen each other, once they meet again. This is a true friend. Chu Qingyan looked at the person in front of her, who was always flirting with her, and couldn't help but smile. She didn't have many friends, but everyone treated her with sincerity, and that was enough. Because the two chatted for a long time and it was quickly approaching evening. Two teat, s's. Toot. It the vat she that. Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes. Then, she turned to look at the sky that was slowly being dyed red by the setting sun. Her mind was filled with the image of Big Ice Cube's unhappy expression when they left today. She couldn't help but lower her head and smile. Inadvertently, he saw this shy look, like a flash of light in the middle of the night, dazzling but fleeting. It was also like the moment before a lotus flower bloomed, beautiful but brief. He didn't know what she was thinking, but in this world, there was no other person who could make her reveal such an expression. He felt his chest surge, and the taste of blood filled his mouth. He gripped the corner of the table tightly, barely suppressing the surging blood in his body, and slowly regaining his composure. At this time, Chu Qingyan turned to look at him, her expression a little apologetic. I might not be able to accompany you for dinner. I have to go back. I'll owe you this time. When we're leaving the capital, I'll definitely let you send me off. I won't go back until you're drunk. Her apologetic tone and soft expression had already melted his heart into a puddle of water. He hooked a devilish smile. You won't go back until I'm drunk? You've really planned it out well. She laughed mischievously. If we're both drunk, who's going to send you home? Look at how considerate I am. How much I take care of you. Looking at her self-praising appearance, his heart couldn't help but move. After hesitating for a moment, he still followed his heart. He raised his hand and placed it on her head, rubbing her soft hair. Little girl, if you can leave the capital, go as far as you can and don't come back. The court is dangerous. It's not as safe as the common people or the Jianghu. If you're here, I won't be at ease. She originally thought that he was playing a prank and wanted to slap his hand away, but she heard these sincere and earnest words. For the first time, from his frivolous words, she felt entrusted, solemn, sighed, and an indescribable sadness. She couldn't help but want to raise her head to look at his expression, but because of the difference in height and his hand on her head, she couldn't raise her head at all. She thought of their positions, of how that had taken her away from the river without hesitation. She lowered her head and slowly spoke. Dongting, when will you leave this troublesome place? She clearly felt his hand pause, then slowly stroked her head again. If there's a chance, I'll go find you. His soft laughter was accompanied by his unique voice, beautiful and pleasant to the ears. After saying this, the weight on her head was removed, and she couldn't help but raise her head to look at him, still with that frivolous expression. Dongting, before I suspected that you were threatened to do bad things, so I rushed to meet you today. But now I'm relieved. Her gentle eyes carried a smile as she vowed solemnly. But if anyone wants to hurt you, you can tell me. I don't need the power of the big ice block to help you teach them a lesson. He stared blankly at the person in front of him. She clearly didn't reach his shoulder, and was so petite and lovable, but she seriously said that she would protect him. A warm current flowed from his heart to his limbs, soaking his cold body and mind in a hot spring. He chuckled softly, "Silly girl, how can a scourge like me be bullied by others? You should be worried about yourself." Chu Qingyan unhappily glared at him. "Humph, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm going home." When she passed by him, she made a face at him. Then she proudly swaggered away with her 2 maidservants. He smiled faintly and leaned against the soft window sill, his gaze falling on the entrance of the tea house. It wasn't until that crimson figure appeared, and then disappeared into the crowd, that he removed the inner force that was suppressing his body. His face rapidly turned pale. If Chu Qingyan was still here, she would probably be shocked. "Master, you've seen Miss Chu. Let this subordinate find a doctor for you." Before Xuanqi Zimo could finish speaking, he cried out in alarm, "Master, you!" Higashio Motetsu found him noisy, so he frowned slightly and lowered his head to look at the golden fan. There was a drop of blood where the lotus flower bloomed, and soon, another drop of blood dripped down. He didn't care at all about the blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. After casually wiping it, he took a handkerchief from the side and carefully wiped the blood stains on the golden fan. This was a gift from the little girl, so he mustn't dirty it. If the little girl got angry and stopped giving him gifts, that would be terrible. Xuanqi Zimo looked at the rare, gentle and serious expression on his master's face, and he suddenly had a bold suspicion. Chapter 1273. Because he did not let go of her the entire way, the oil lamp was not lit. When the stone door was closed, the entire secret room fell into an endless darkness. However, this was not a difficult thing for people with strong inner strength. Xiao Su arrived at the bedroom without any obstructions. He placed the person in his arms on the bed and got up to leave. Suddenly his sleeve was grabbed. In the darkness he heard the little fellow's confused and panicked voice. "Where are you going?" Xiao Su bent down, and the corners of his mouth lifted into a playful smile. "You want me that badly?" As soon as he finished speaking, she immediately let go of his hand. She harumphed, "Nonsense." Xiao Su laughed out loud. His clear and bright voice spread throughout the secret room. It was like the sound of a bell ringing in her eardrums. She couldn't help but cover her ears as she silently cursed in her heart. Too bad, Big Ice Cube is too bad." At this time, she heard him explain while holding back his laughter. "I'm going to light a lamp. The oil lamp in the room was broken by you, so I can only light the one in the study room." Thinking back to that day, when she was cleaning the room, she felt that the oil lamp was pretty, so she took it down to look at it. However, she accidentally broke it. Now that Big Ice Cube lifted it up, she felt very embarrassed. Because the study room was on the other side of the wall, although there was a door in the middle, the light from the lamp was blocked by the wall. At most, it could only pass through the door. However, the light was much weaker, but at least they could see people's silhouettes. In addition, with their martial arts, they could see clearly in the darkness. This room was very simple. There was only a bed with pillows and blankets on it. There were no other decorations, which suited the Big Ice Cube style of doing things. When Xiao Su returned, she had already sat up and looked around, using this to reduce the nervousness in her heart. When the strong masculine aura surrounded her, she tilted her head to look at the person standing by the bed. The light behind him was very weak, but it added a bit of warmth to his noble aura. She forgot her nervousness and shyness for a moment, looking at his eyes with a bit of infatuation. In such a dark place, his eyes seemed to reflect thousands of stars in the sea, vast and beautiful. She couldn't help but sit up on the bed. She hugged his waist and leaned against his chest. "Big Ice Cube, what are you thinking about?" She saw him staring at her, as if he was thinking. The heat that had just subsided began to boil again when she approached him. His eyes darkened and he lowered his head to seal her lips. Eager and urgent, she couldn't stand it and was forced to lean back. Because she had placed all her weight on him, there was no support for her feet. When he leaned over, she couldn't bear the force and fell backward. Xiao Su pulled her into his arms, and the two of them fell onto the bed. Because Xiao had purposely controlled his strength and direction, she didn't feel any pain when she fell. He was supporting himself on both sides of her body, so he didn't put too much force on her. Only this position of one up and one down was very ambiguous. Their eyes met in the air, and the air instantly became hot. In the darkness, although there was a faint light in her eyes, the only thing left was the pair of scorching eyes. It was as if there were raging flames burning in them. Once she touched them, she would be burned to ashes along with them. She didn't dare look straight at him, and wanted to look away. However, he just happened to lean down. While she was in a daze, a light kiss fell between her eyebrows, then fell on her eyes, nose, cheeks, and finally kissed her lips. It wasn't as intense as before, but this time it was as gentle as the wind. She couldn't help muttering in her heart, did the big ice cube change his personality? However, when she was in a daze, she felt her waist loosen. Looking down, her belt was gone. When she looked up again, the big ice cube was holding something in his hand. Wasn't that her belt? She saw him casually throw it on the bed frame, and without waiting for her to react, he kissed her lips. After lingering for a while, he didn't stay any longer. He went all the way down, and the collar of her clothes also went all the way down. From now on, even if you ask me to stop, I won't agree. When he left mark after mark on her body, he raised his head and lightly bit her lips, and then domineeringly declared. She pouted. She didn't plan to ask him to stop. However, she suddenly realized that from just now until now, his face was still covered by a mask. She was a little unhappy in her heart. She had almost exposed herself to him, but he still wrapped himself up tightly. After he said this, the little fellow didn't have any reaction at all, and the doubts in his heart increased. But at this time, his whole body was suppressed to the point of discomfort, and he planned to ask her later. When he was about to lower his head again, a white little hand suddenly reached out in front of him and easily took off his mask. He saw the mischievous look in her eyes, and a smile appeared in his eyes. Chu Qingyan had just taken off his mask when she saw his soul-sucking smile, and she couldn't help being stunned. His ink-black hair hung loosely over his shoulders, covering half of his handsome face. However, his skin was even fairer than a woman's, his nose as tall as a snowy mountain, his soul-stirring eyebrows, and his calm yet mysterious smile became a painting in front of her. It was a picture of a handsome man that was difficult to describe with a brush. She didn't know why, but even though she often saw his face under the mask, she couldn't help being captivated by him every time. Shouldn't she slowly get used to it, and then feel that it was normal? Why was it that every time she would be stunned by him and couldn't look away? While she was in a daze, Xiao had already taken off his outer clothes, revealing his inner clothes. His clothes were tight and covered his strong body, but it made people daydream and couldn't help but want to have a nosebleed. Chu Qingyan immediately looked away. If this continued, she really would have a nosebleed and embarrass herself. However, Xiao didn't seem to plan on letting her go. He held the back of her head with one hand, and then continued what he hadn't finished before, while his other hand followed her exquisite curves down. In the darkness, other than the eyes, all of her senses became very sharp. Especially for people like her who practice martial arts. She was much more sensitive to other people's touch than normal people. At this time, she was also suffering from both ice and fire. She couldn't help but move closer to him, her hands hooked around his neck, wanting to draw more. After an unknown amount of time, she softly moaned and heard him say in her ear, "Just now you said you would help me take care of it. You can start now, in?" His suppressed voice was mixed with enduring pain. She knew that he had endured a lot. Her charming face immediately flushed red, and her hand was pulled in a direction. She didn't need to think to know where it was. She had brought this upon herself, so even if she had to bite the bullet, she still had to do it. Very quickly, in the quiet secret room, a man's muffled groan sounded. It was painful and comfortable, as if it was hell and heaven. Chapter 1274. This process seemed to have taken a long time, as though a century had passed. By the time she lay back down on the bed, she was completely exhausted and couldn't care about anything else. At this moment, Xiao was panting lightly. His forehead, shoulders, and chest were covered in fine beads of sweat. On his back and arms, there were also some scratches. After the waves of passion in his body slowly subsided, he slowly opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was the person who was panting heavily with her eyes closed. Her clothes were completely removed, and her exquisite curves rose and fell as she panted. His eyes darkened again, but this time, he was able to control the fire of desire in his heart. After all, he had just eaten his fill. He licked the corner of his mouth, which still had the little fellow's scent. His eyes curved slightly, revealing a smile. He reached out and touched her face. When she felt his touch, she rubbed her face against his fingers obediently. He smiled, wrapped her in the thin blanket, and then lifted her up and placed her on his knees. Chu Qingyan, who was exhausted, felt someone moving her. She opened her eyes vigilantly. When she saw that it was a big block of ice, she relaxed and closed her eyes again. She was so tired that she didn't even want to move. She leaned on his broad shoulders, found a comfortable position in his arms, and snuggled in. At this time, his upper body was naked and he was only wearing a pair of underwear. At this time, the little fellow had crawled out of the thin quilt and leaned on his body. When their skin touched, it quickly caused the young body to become restless again. He took a deep breath and covered her body with the blanket again. Only then did he feel at ease and pull her into his arms. At this moment, he was puzzled. At this moment, he heard her shallow breathing, but he didn't know if she could hear it. He hugged her and said softly, "Why are you suddenly taking the initiative today?" Because Yanluo said. Just when Xiao thought that she couldn't hear him and was about to give up, he heard her mumbling in a daze. His heart skipped a beat, and he looked at her without blinking. His voice became gentler as he guided her patiently. What did she say? She said that all men have normal needs. If you hold it in, you'll go crazy. That's why she asked me to relieve you. As soon as she finished speaking, the person who had yet to fall asleep suddenly felt the temperature around her plummet. She couldn't help but shrink her neck. Then it was as if there was a cold wind blowing in her ears. The air around her suddenly became extremely oppressive, and she couldn't help but slowly open her eyes. What entered her eyes was the big ice cube's peerless face. Just as she was about to speak, she saw him staring at her with a strange expression. She suddenly felt a little scared. Big Ice Cube, why are you looking at me like that? She moved, and the thin blanket covering her body slid down, revealing her fragrant shoulders full of ambiguous marks. She immediately wanted to pull the thin blanket up to cover those places. However, she couldn't pull him up no matter how hard she tried. She followed the thin blanket, and saw a slender hand pinching the other end with 2 fingers. She couldn't help but blush as she looked up at him. Big Ice Cube, let go. Xiao didn't seem to hear her. Instead, he leaned closer to her and whispered softly. However, the words that came out of his mouth caused her back to stiffen. You just said that if I didn't eat you up, I would go crazy from holding it in. When did she say that? She subconsciously recalled everything that had happened just now. It seemed that she had accidentally let it slip in her sleep. Looking at the sudden change in her expression, he knew that she had recalled it. Xiao's expression was unreadable. His gaze was fixed on her body, not missing a single change on her face. So you're worried that I'll go crazy from holding it in? The first sentence made her tremble with fear, but the tone of the second sentence made her hair stand on end. However, his aura was so close that she had nowhere to hide. The big ice cube had become so scary. Previously, Yanluo had said that the thing that men hated the most was being questioned about their ability in that area. What she had said just now was literally questioning the big ice cube. No wonder the big ice cube suddenly changed. She shrunk her neck and laughed mischievously. She planned to muddle through and said, Big Ice Cube, I definitely didn't mean anything else. Don't misunderstand. Misunderstand? He withdrew his strength and she leaned closer to him. He looked at her eyes that were so close to his and smiled slightly, revealing a sinister smile. What are you trying to say that I misunderstood? Oh no, she was about to let the cat out of the bag. However, it was too late to take back her words. She laughed mischievously at him. Then she wanted to sneak out of his embrace and slip away. However, the moment her feet touched the ground, a strong force lifted her up. As the world spun, she felt herself lying back on the couch. Just as she looked up, a dark shadow pressed down on her from above. Her hands were pinned to the couch and her legs were pinned down by him. She couldn't move. She looked at the handsome face that was less than an inch away from her, and subconsciously swallowed her saliva. Be big ice cube. It should be very late. Let's go back and rest. Let's rest here tonight. He rejected her request. She didn't give up and said, then moved to the side. If you sleep on top, I won't be able to sleep. Xiao chuckled in his heart, but he couldn't show it on the surface. This time, he had to thoroughly let the little fellow know that although she took the initiative tonight, he couldn't really eat her up. This was the real torture. He had to hold it in. The previous torture was not worth mentioning at all. Aren't you worried that I'll affect our married life in the future? Now, I have time to verify it with you personally. He lowered his head a little lower, and he would be able to touch her lips. She could clearly feel the warmth of his breath sweeping across her lips as he spoke. She couldn't help but purse her lips and hurriedly came up with an excuse. No need, no need. I've already verified it just now. However, he still pressed on. No, you didn't check carefully just now and I didn't cooperate well. This time, I'll definitely make you satisfied. What the hell was the big ice cube talking about? Very quickly, she understood the meaning of his words. He didn't say anything else and directly sealed her lips, not letting go of a single inch. She felt a chill on her body and the thin blanket had disappeared without a trace. She tried to talk to him, but she didn't have the strength to be entangled with him. However, his attacks were like a prairie fire that quickly engulfed her. So no matter what you say, don't doubt a man's ability in that aspect. Otherwise, once they were angered, the consequences would be uncontrollable. Because they could torture you in all sorts of ways. Who told you to keep begging for mercy? It turned out that the big ice cube was so scary when he was calculative. This time she was done for. Previously, Xiao still had some reservations with her, afraid that she wouldn't be able to take it. Now she wouldn't be able to rest for the entire night. Chapter 1275. This time, from midnight to dawn, Chu Qingyan seemed to have been thrown into a vast ocean. The waves swept her up and made her fall again. She was bobbing up and down in the waves without anything to rely on. However, in the sky above the ocean, there were large blocks of ice everywhere. When she finally left the ocean, her strength was exhausted and she gradually fell into a deep sleep. Ian, do you still doubt my ability now? Xiao caressed her face, and then pulled her into his embrace. He covered her with a thin blanket and pressed his face against hers as he also fell asleep. The two young bodies snuggled up to each other in an intimate position, as if no one could separate them. The weak firelight turned into the most gentle veil at this moment, enveloping the two of them in the light. The dim yellow shadows and the quiet room were peaceful and warm. However, how long could this kind of tranquil time last? Both of them didn't sleep for the entire night. Compared to Xiao's full meal, Xiao was depressed and cold. After returning from the relay station today, his entire person wasn't right. He didn't have any interest in doing anything. He couldn't even continue reading the newly collected loan book after flipping through a few pages. He couldn't help but throw it to the side and rub his temples. There were some things that you deliberately didn't want to think about, but they just loved to appear in your mind. He recalled Yu Qingxi leaning on her body and saying those words intimately and gently. She also had a bashful look. This scene made him unable to help but feel angry. However, he then recalled that when he left, little rascal's face was filled with sadness, as if she was the one being bullied. When her hand left his sleeve bit by bit, he felt as if something had been severed between the two of them. This gave him an extremely uneasy feeling, and also a bit of panic. Xiao, I helped you so much, but you wronged me. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have fought. Those were the words she said when she was extremely aggrieved after being scolded by him for teaching those two hoodlums a lesson. His heart softened when he thought about how she looked like she wanted to say something when she left today. Could it be that he had wronged her again? When it came to the matter of Yu Qingxi, he was indeed too unperturbed. It was as if his past self, who could remain calm and collected even when his enemy provoked him, had slowly lost his patience in front of her. He was becoming less and less like himself. He would only feel this way when he was facing her. This made him feel shocked, but at the same time, he felt that it was only natural. Little rascal should be asleep by now, but he suddenly really wanted to see her. The green robe flashed under the moonlight and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in Pang Zhijing's room. Pang Zhijing couldn't sleep for the entire night due to her emotional turmoil. She had just fallen asleep, her eyes were red and swollen, and her nose was red. When Xiao stood in front of her bed, he saw her pitiful appearance. He was stunned for a moment before sitting down on her bed. He couldn't help but reach out to touch her eyes as he murmured, "Are you crying for me?" Because she didn't sleep well, Pang Zhijing let out a soft moan and slowly woke up when she heard movement. When Xiao saw this, he immediately reached out to touch her sleeping acupuncture point. Her half-opened eyes slowly closed, and she finally fell into a deep sleep. When he heard her breathing become long, he let out a sigh of relief. However, he was frightened by his own reaction. Earlier, he was actually afraid that she would wake up and see his emotions. Now that he thought about it, what was there to be afraid of? However, if that pair of clean and pure eyes opened, he wouldn't know how to face her. Perhaps he was afraid of the coldness in her eyes. He had said so many unpleasant things today, so she must hate him. His fingertips touched the skin on her face. It was smooth and soft, making him unable to part with it. At this time, her acupuncture point had already been sealed, so he wasn't worried that she would suddenly wake up again. Thus, he hugged her onto his lap and wrapped his hands around her shoulders and waist. He locked her in his embrace and helped her adjust the most comfortable angle before he leaned against the bed wall. The soft body in his embrace had become a treasure that he didn't want to let go of. At this moment, Pang Zhijing seemed to have seen something beautiful in her dream. Her lips curved into a faint smile. When he reached out to touch her face, she suddenly moved and hugged his waist. She leaned into his embrace and rubbed against his chest. He didn't know what she was dreaming about. Then he heard her mutter, "Thick skin big bad guy, I hate you." Xiao's hand paused as his gaze locked onto her face, as if to confirm what she had just said. However, Pang Zhijing, who had finished scolding him, had already fallen asleep contentedly. Xiao didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Even in her dreams she was scolding him. This was really making him unwilling to let go. Smelling the young girl's fragrance on her body, he felt a surge of tiredness. He couldn't help but lean his head on her shoulder as he hugged her and gradually fell asleep. All these years, his sleep had always been poor. However, when he saw her sleeping soundly just now, he couldn't help but have the urge to hold her in his arms. However, he followed his heart and did as he wished. At the same time, the long-awaited tiredness also came. The warm light shone on the bed, covering the two young bodies that were leaning against each other. Immediately, it gave them a faint glow. Their outstanding appearance, their otherworldly temperament, everything seemed so quiet and beautiful. Pang Zhijing slept very well. She thought that since she had slept so late last night, she would be very tired. However, she didn't expect to feel so refreshed. As expected, sleeping until late in the morning to make up for lost sleep was the most useful. However, why did she feel that her shoulder was a little sore, as if it had been pressed down by something heavy the entire night? She rubbed it and sighed. It must be a stiff pillow. When one was unlucky, even water would be stuck between one's teeth. At this moment, Luer came in with water. "Princess, you slept very well last night. You slept all the way until now," Luer said with a smile. "Yeah, I thought it was very rare too." Pang Zhijing chuckled, then got up and prepared to wash up. However, she heard Luer say with some confusion, "But I slept very early last night. However, I didn't wake up when I was supposed to. How strange." When Pang Zhijing passed by her, she couldn't help but pat her shoulder. "I think you've overworked yourself. You're still growing. There's no harm in sleeping more. I don't need anyone to serve me." Luer's eyes were filled with tears when she heard that. She said gratefully, "Princess, you treat me so well." Seeing the tears in her eyes, Pang Zhijing paused. She couldn't help but think that after yesterday, there were only 2 days left. If she disappeared, what would Luer do? Perhaps she could ask Qingyan to help look after her. If Luer was willing, she could meet up with her after the storm. When she lowered her head and saw her reflection in the water, a gentle and elegant face appeared in front of her. She couldn't help but reach out to touch it. However, when her fingers touched the water, the shadow disappeared from her fingertips. She suddenly smiled bitterly. So to her he was just the moon in the water, the flower in the mirror. Chapter 1276. Inside the secret room. Although the sun was shining brightly outside, it was still dusky inside. Only the weak candlelight was supporting it, contending against the darkness. From the study room to the bedroom, the light followed the connecting door and extended through the bricks bit by bit. It extended to the belt scattered on the floor, the dark red clothes, the black outer robe, the green jade hairpin, the snow-white inner clothes. It extended to the side of the bed, where two pairs of shoes were nestled together, incomparably intimate. At this point, the light was already very weak. It slowly climbed onto the bed, and then lay on the thin blanket, unable to move anymore. The light fell on the face of the person on the bed. The curled eyelashes trembled. After a while, she slowly opened her eyes. The dark and gentle scene made her a little confused. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Just as she wanted to move her body, she felt her whole body go limp. Following that, a strong restraint came from her waist. Her nose was filled with the unique scent of a man. Suddenly, there were many memories in her mind. Those nimble lips and tongue ignited all over her body. Those omnipresent fingers wandered everywhere. Everywhere they passed, they left a little mark. No matter how she begged for mercy, he used his lips to seal all her moans. She immediately sobered up and did not dare to continue thinking. Without lifting the thin blanket, she could imagine what kind of ambiguous marks there were on her body. She could not help but be a little depressed and angry. Wasn't she just worried about him? Was she wrong? He actually. Her face turned red. He punished her like this. Just as she was immersed in her vexed mood, that pair of black eyes had already slowly opened. Like the rising sun on the horizon, it suddenly lit up the snow-white sparkling skin. It was like a sleeping high mountain flower suddenly blooming. In an instant, 100 flowers bloomed. Suddenly, she felt the temperature in the air drop a few degrees. A pair of burning eyes stared at him. And on her neck, a warm breath blew on it, making it itchy. However, last night's memories flooded in. She had a bad premonition. Could she lie down like a corpse and pretend to be asleep? Just as this thought flashed through her mind, the iron-like hand on her waist suddenly slowly pulled her into his embrace. She wanted to cry, but no tears came out. It seemed that pretending to be dead did not work. After struggling in her heart for a while, she raised her head and smiled brightly. "Morning, Big Ice Cube. Did you sleep well last night?" This question made her want to bite off her own tongue. She had really touched a sore spot. But when she met those enchanting eyes, the distracting thoughts in her mind suddenly stopped. The person in front of her was lying on his side on the couch with one hand propped up by his ear, and the other clasped around her waist. There was an indescribable laziness in his expression and posture, a far cry from his usual cold and hard appearance. She did not know why he had changed so much overnight, but she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. It was good to be good-looking. No matter what he did, he was always so attractive. Although Xiao was somewhat absent-minded, his gaze never left the little fellow. Seeing her staring at him in a daze, he raised his eyebrows slightly and tightened his grip on her waist, pulling her into his embrace. Under the thin blanket, the two of them were not wearing anything. Being so close to each other made the two of them tremble. Last night when the two of them were hugging each other, they did not feel anything because they had already done so many intimate things. Adding on the fact that they were sleepy, they did not have any scruples. However, at this moment, the two of them were very awake. They were so awake that they could clearly feel the temperature of each other's skin. He was naturally cold and she was naturally warm. When the cold and hot touched, it brought about an indescribable ambiguity in the air. "I slept very well last night, but," she heard him whisper in her ear, like a cool breeze blowing past her ear. Gentle and hoarse, sexy and low. She was bewitched and asked in a daze, "But what is it?" The young girl in front of him had a rosy complexion that was like peach blossoms in March. It made people want to love her tenderly. The possessiveness in his heart gradually rose. His gaze fell on her slightly parted lips, and his heart rippled uncontrollably. But I don't seem to have slept enough. Ah. Although there was no sunlight shining in here, according to her deduction, the sun should be shining brightly outside. Her face turned red again. Although they had slept very late last night, it should be about time now. She did not understand why the big ice cube was still not sleeping enough. Logically speaking, people like them who woke up early to practice martial arts would not have such a situation. Just as she was letting her imagination run wild, the scorching hot breath with the scent of ink was already in front of her. No, to be exact, it stopped less than half an inch away from her. While she was surprised, she felt the large palm on her waist slowly start to circle around her back. That was the most sensitive part of her body besides her ears. Her entire body went limp and she did not even have the strength to pry his hand away. In the air, the dangerous aura kept spinning and expanding. She realized that early in the morning was the time when a man's desire was the strongest. Could it be that the big ice cube wanted? Her scalp tightened, and she immediately said in a soft and coquettish voice, Big ice cube, what do you want to do? My hand is still sore and I can't move it. Don't be afraid, I won't let you use your hand again. It's been hard on you tonight. He gently whispered into her ear, as if he was her most intimate lover. Hearing his words, she could not help but feel relieved. The fire in the big ice cube's eyes earlier must have been an illusion. It must have been an illusion? The hand on her waist seemed to be unsatisfied with staying there, and slowly moved to other places. Her body could not help but stiffen. She turned her head to look at the person in front of her who still had a lazy look. She gritted her teeth and said, Didn't you say that you won't let me use? Before she could finish her words, the person in front of her suddenly leaned over her soft and delicate body. His lips pressed against hers as he said in a domineering and gentle voice, How could I bear for you to work so hard? I just want you to sleep with me for a while. Their lips pressed against each other, and every word he spat out would rub against her lips. The temperature in the air suddenly rose, and the ambiguity lingered around the two of them. Her heartbeat suddenly became chaotic, and she couldn't stop beating. Before she could even react, he had already entered. Since he was already here, how could he not enter? She was suddenly swept up by him until her head was disoriented. Above her was his plundering and below her was his constant teasing. She felt like her entire body was about to be swallowed up by the flames. Wasn't she just worried that he would suffocate? Why did he have to punish her again and again like this? He really didn't want to suffer any losses. Just as these thoughts flashed through her mind, the person in front of her realized that she was distracted and immediately increased the strength in his hands. Her entire body went numb as she was once again brought to the top of the waves. Chapter 1277. After the lesson of blood and tears, Chu Qingyan came to a conclusion. That was Big Ice Cube was actually a wolf in human skin. Because wolves were best at holding grudges. Although Big Ice Cube usually didn't care about anything and didn't care about it, every time she did something wrong, he would hold on to her and not let her go. This time, because of a small sentence, he punished her in such a way, and in such a terrible way. Thus, one night passed. One day passed. Another night passed. He was using his body to prove to her that there was nothing wrong with his body. And if it wasn't for the fact that there was nothing in the secret room, he wouldn't mind continuing to prove it. This punishment lasted for 1 day and 2 nights. When she woke up the next day, she was so hungry that her chest was sticking to her back. Only then did he let her go. Thinking of this, her face couldn't help burning hot. And when Big Ice Cube carried her back to the courtyard, everyone looked at her with ambiguous gazes. It made her want to bury her face in Big Ice Cube's chest. It was too embarrassing, too embarrassing. And Hualing and the others kept staring at her stomach with faces full of joy. It seemed like not long later, her stomach would be able to give birth to a little master. Black lines covered her head. She and Big Ice Cube didn't do anything at all right? No, even if they did what they should do and what they shouldn't do, the last step. She buried her face in Big Ice Cube's chest again. The thin clothes penetrated the little fellow's burning hot body. Xiao Su couldn't help hugging her even tighter, and the curve of his lips rose even higher. As expected, men who had eaten and drank their fill were all like this. When he put the little fellow back on the bed, before Xining, Jasper, and Xining came in, he lowered his head and stole a kiss on her lips. He kissed her until she couldn't breathe before reluctantly leaving. Then he reached out to pinch her angry cheeks and said with a smile, "Wash up properly and then come over to eat." She said in a bad mood, "Do you think I can still walk over like this?" "I'll carry you over," he replied without thinking. She was stunned for a moment, and happened to catch a glimpse of the little clothes in his eyes. Then she realized that she was being teased again. She had already received a lot of attention on her way back. She didn't want to experience it again. "No, I refuse to eat with you today." She was angry, but she still added a deadline. Although her small face was wrinkled, after 2 nights of physical exhaustion, coupled with her low and soft voice, she did not have any imposing manner at all. Instead, it was like a kitten tickling his palm. He chuckled softly. Although the mask had been put back on, his eyes still couldn't hide his joy. Chu Qingyan was a little annoyed by his smile, took the pillow and threw it at him. It was a pity that he didn't have any strength left, and the pillow only hit him softly. He took the pillow with one hand, and placed it behind her back for her to lean against. He ignored the sparks of embarrassment and anger in her eyes and touched her face. Then, as if he had thought of something, the smile on his lips faded as he looked at her. "What did Higashio Motetsu want from you yesterday?" She slapped his hand away and glared at him in annoyance. It was the day before yesterday. He then remembered that they had stayed in the secret room for such a long time. He gave a low laugh. "You must have been starving. You look like you've eaten a lot," she retorted without holding back. Seriously, she was almost starving to death. "I feel like I can eat a bit more." His eyes sparkled as he looked at her. She immediately pulled the blanket and looked at him with a frightened expression. "Big ice cube, do you know what's appropriate? If you eat too much, it's easy to burden your stomach, and then you'll have a big belly. You don't want to become a fatty, right?" Hearing her talk nonsense, Xiao Su was amused by her, but he still had an indifferent expression on his face. He said thoughtfully, "You're right, you can't eat until you become a fatty." She thought that he had heard everything she said, and was about to let out a sigh of relief when she heard his hot words ring in her ear. "So I'll eat slowly bit by bit until you're all in my stomach." Such bloody words, coming from his teasing and charming voice, made her feel like a cooked crayfish in a pot. It was completely cooked, red and pink. You're too bad." She pointed at his nose and only managed to squeeze out this sentence after a long time. Xiao Su chuckled and took her hand into his palm. He then lowered his head and kissed her. "I'll go back to the courtyard first. Be good and I'll come over to eat later." After saying that, he stood up and pinched her face. Then, like a cat that had stolen a fish, he left in a happy mood. Chu Qingyan, who was frozen like a rock, was crying in her heart. When did the big ice cube suddenly become so good at picking up girls? And his methods were endless. This made it impossible for people to resist him, alright? Moreover, she was an experienced person who was obsessed with looks and voices, and the big ice cube was simply the best in these 2 aspects. He was the best in terms of beauty, the best in terms of natural sexiness. She immediately buried her whole body in the quilt and wailed. She was probably going to be eaten by him for the rest of her life. However, in the end, who would eat who was still an unknown mystery. However, neither of them noticed that the question about Higashio Motetsu just now had disappeared in the midst of their laughter. However, the person who asked the question didn't notice it, and the person who answered didn't notice it either. It was drowned in their conversation just like that. Perhaps in their world, they had already connected their lives and futures together, becoming a fusion world that outsiders couldn't enter. Except for each other, no one else could shake the feelings between them. And because of this, in their eyes, they could only see each other and couldn't tolerate anyone else. At this moment, in the temporary imperial residence of the Southern Blue Bridal Party, a figure stood by the window. "Go. You must deliver the letter to Prince E. If he can come, our plan will be half successful." "Yes." After the subordinate left, the figure turned around. It was Yu Qingxi. He revealed a feminine smile that said he was determined to win. Not long after, Prince Yi's estate received an invitation card. Xiao glanced at the invitation card handed to him by his subordinate and frowned slightly. Are you sure this invitation card was sent from the temporary imperial residence? Yes, Lord. This was indeed sent by Yu Qingxi. After hearing his subordinate's words, Xiao waved his hand and dismissed him. Then he picked up the invitation card and flipped it open. At the front, there were some insignificant words like, I've heard a lot about you. But when he reached the back, his eyes suddenly narrowed. It was about the poison in Little Rascal's body. He actually dared to use this to threaten him. Lord, this Yu Qingxi sent you an invitation card for no reason. It's too suspicious. Why don't you reject it? Tomorrow is the day we carry out our plan. There can't be any mistakes. Lin Jiangdong stood in front of the table with a serious expression. Xiao muttered to himself for a while, then said to Lin Jiangdong, this prince has decided to go. Chapter 1278. Xiao's decision made Lin Jiangdong anxious. He said in a serious tone, Lord, we can't take this risk at such an urgent moment. You can't agree. This prince knows what to do. It won't affect tomorrow's plan, Xiao said calmly. Yu Qingxi's actions in Southern Blue show that he's a gentleman on the surface, but a vile person in the dark. He's not presentable at all. Why do you want to meet with him? Maybe he's plotting something. Oh right, I remember now. In Southern Blue, the princess had a dispute with Yu Qingxi. You, teacher, don't make wild guesses. This prince has made up his mind. You don't have to say anything more. If you have the time, why don't you go and check whether tomorrow's details are properly arranged? Only he could discipline little scoundrel. No one else had the right to criticize her. Although Lin Jiangdong didn't agree, he could only agree and prepare to leave the room when he saw Lord's firm tone and the signs of anger. Wait, have you sent the betrothal gifts? Xiao turned to look at him. Lin Jiangdong immediately lowered his head and replied, I sent someone to deliver them to the relay station yesterday. Very good. You may leave. Lin Jiangdong wanted to say something, but he didn't have the chance. He sighed softly, turned around and left. Lord treated this princess so well that there was nothing to say. He basically emptied the entire treasury of Prince Yi's estate, just to give her betrothal gifts. He shook his head. Could it be that Lord was also sad that no one locked him up? After the room returned to silence, Xiao imagined what little scoundrel's expression would be if she received the betrothal gifts. Although the estate's assets were only a part of his wealth, he was willing to use everything in the estate to hold a grand wedding banquet for her. She was alone in the Sichuan with no relatives or friends. He couldn't treat her unfairly. Xiao pursed his lips. So he couldn't drag this matter on. If Yu Qingxi didn't reveal any more information about the life-severing poison because he didn't show up, then he would probably regret it. Although he had received news that Cheng Yanluo had arrived at the King of England's residence, he couldn't place all his hopes on her. What if she didn't have the confidence to cure Little Rascal? So no matter whether what Yu Qingxi said was true or false, he had to make a trip. He would rather walk through a mountain of swords and a sea of flames than let go of this opportunity. After making up his mind, he glanced at the agreed time and stood up. Facing the empty room, he ordered, Order the first team to accompany me. Yes. Suddenly, there was a fluctuation in the air, but it quickly disappeared. Xiao straightened his clothes and strode out. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, he appeared outside the restaurant. Although it was a restaurant in name, it was actually no different from a red light district. It was just that it was much grander than those places. It was opened in the name of discussing literary talent. The women standing outside didn't have the air of a prostitute. Each of them was dignified and elegant, looking no different from the young ladies of aristocratic families. But those who were well versed in the business inside all knew that although these women looked extremely pure on the outside, their skills in bed were even worse than those of the courtesans. The courtesans were charming on the outside, but the women here were charming on the inside. Their eyes were very sharp. They could judge whether a person was rich or noble. Therefore, They could easily win the favor of the distinguished guests who came here for pleasure under the pretext of discussing the 4 arts of zither, chess, calligraphy and painting. When the elegant and noble Xiao appeared, regardless of whether it was the women standing outside or the absent-minded women inside, their eyes all lit up. What a tall and straight noble young man. The restaurant had been open for a long time, but this was the first time it welcomed such a noble young man. At first glance, one could tell that he came from a big family. Otherwise he wouldn't have such an otherworldly temperament. Because Xiao always stayed at home in the name of recuperating, he rarely attended banquets. Therefore, even if he walked on the street, not many people could recognize him as the sickly Prince E. These women didn't swarm up like prostitutes. Instead, they respectfully surrounded him and asked if he needed any help. However, each of them puffed out their chests and sucked in their bellies, trying to show their best side in front of him. Of the people who came here, which one of them wasn't here to seek pleasure? Therefore, each of them had a tacit understanding to secretly compete for his favor. However, Xiao couldn't help but feel disgusted when he saw so many women surrounding him. Each of them had a lustful look in their eyes and approached him quietly. He raised his hand and the guards behind him immediately stepped forward and separated these women. They didn't have any protective feelings for the fairer sex. These women looked at Xiao with some frustration and pity. At this moment, a woman who looked like a manager saw this scene and immediately walked up. Her eyes fell on Xiao. He was dressed luxuriously and behaved appropriately. At first glance, she could tell that he wasn't an ordinary person. She turned her head and scolded the restless women. "What are you all standing here for? Hurry up and greet the guest." Most of the women were afraid of the female manager's dignity and retreated. However, there were still some who stood there eagerly. One of them said unwillingly, "Sisterly, this young master is also a guest. Why don't you let Yuan greet him?" Manager Li looked at this unobservant woman, who forgot herself in front of a handsome man. She couldn't help but glare at her fiercely. "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't block the young master's way." The women then dispersed in a hubbub. Xiao didn't care about what these people said at all. He looked around at the layout of the restaurant and narrowed his eyes. This layout could be said to be extravagant. Just the 2 flower pots placed at the staircase alone were worth more than what an ordinary person could earn in a lifetime. It wasn't that he hadn't heard of this restaurant, but because his business wasn't involved in this area, he didn't pay much attention to it. From the looks of it, to be able to build such a large restaurant here and operate such a business, if there was no one behind it, it probably wouldn't last more than a few months. Moreover, this restaurant had been operating for at least 3 to 4 years. When he returned, he must investigate who was behind this. At this moment, Manager Li had already leaned over. She folded her hands on her waist and curtsied to him. Then, she fiddled with her still charming slender waist and said delicately, "May I ask what young master needs?" The 4 treasures of the study, the zither, chess, poetry, calligraphy and painting. Before she could finish, Xiao had already interrupted her. "Is there a young master with the surname Yu here?" Manager Li was stunned. His smile just now was so charming that her heart couldn't help but soften. However, she quickly regained her senses. "There is a young master Yu who booked an elegant room an hour ago. May I ask if he is young master's friend?" "He can't be considered a friend, but you can bring me down to meet him." Xiao was very disgusted with Yu Qingxi. To be able to arrange to meet at such a place, it was enough to see that this person's character wasn't very good. He really should let little rascal take a good look. Was she blind or something? She actually fell for such a refined scum. At the same time, he felt that it wasn't worth it for her, but at the same time he felt a little uncomfortable. Manager Li very attentively led them upstairs. Chapter 1279. The women downstairs all stared at Xiao's back with infatuation. Their usual reserved manner in front of guests had all disappeared at this moment. "This is the first time I've seen such a perfect man. His every movement carries a noble air, as if he's a man from a painting," the woman in charge of painting said while holding her heart. "Did you see just now? When he smiled, it was as if a spring breeze had suddenly come and thousands of pear trees had bloomed." The woman in charge of reciting poetry sighed with emotion. If I had to use a song to describe it, I think it would be the poem Wei Feng Qiao. The woman in charge of reciting poetry couldn't help but sing. There's a bandit gentleman like cutting, like exchanging pointers, like polishing, like grinding. If Pang Zhijing was present, she would probably vomit out the food she ate last night. Along the way, Manager Li tried to find a topic to inquire about his identity. Unfortunately, she was tactfully rejected by him. When they reached the door of the elegant room, Manager Li reluctantly shut her mouth. Xiao suddenly had a comparison in his heart. Although little rascal was chatty and noisy, she didn't make him feel annoyed. However, this Manager Li made him have the urge to throw her out. With this comparison, he felt that his little rascal was still very obedient. Sure enough, without comparison, there would be no harm. After someone knocked on the door of the elegant room, it was quickly opened from the inside. A person who looked like an attendant bowed to Xiao, and then raised his hand to invite him in. My young master is already waiting inside. Xiao nodded and left the guard outside the door. He walked in alone. The attendant also left the elegant room and turned to close the door, standing guard outside. Xiao entered the room and turned around after a few steps. When he looked up, he saw Yu Qingxi sitting in the room with light muslin and Manli. At this moment he was drinking alone. When he heard the footsteps, he put down the wine cup and stood up with a smile to meet Xiao's scrutinizing gaze. He bowed slightly and said, "It's been a few days since we last met. Princey, how have you been?" Xiao smiled and said, "Lord Yu is too courteous. There's no need for such formalities outside." Yu Qingxi stood up straight and praised, "You are indeed the kind-hearted Princey. You don't put on any airs when you speak. Last time we parted in a hurry on the street, and a few days ago at the courier station. I didn't have the chance to chat with Prince E. This humble one is very regretful. Seeing that the wedding date is approaching, the Lord must be very busy and I dare not disturb you. But then I remembered that after the marriage, this humble one will immediately depart for Southern Blue, so I could only invite Prince E to come here for a chat." Xiao knew that he was just being polite, so he smiled and said, "Lord Yu is too polite. I've long heard of you. You're one of the most outstanding talents of the new generation in Southern Blue. Your father is the famous Prime Minister of Southern Blue. I'm sure you'll be able to go even further in the future." Yu Qingxi was displeased at the mention of his father again, but he still maintained a cordial look on his face. He stretched out his hand and said, "Princey, please take a seat. Let's drink and enjoy the fun while talking." Xiao nodded and said, "This is Lord Yu's plan. I'll leave it to you to decide." Princey is so forthright. All right, then this humble one will be bold enough to make the decision. I heard that the zither music here is superb. This humble one has already taught it to others. After Yu Qingxi finished speaking, he clapped his hands. A few graceful women carrying zither walked in. After bowing to the two of them, they walked to the side where the veil was draped and sat down. After a few adjustments, a clear and elegant tune flowed out from the veil. At a glance, several graceful figures could be seen behind the veil. They kept waving their fingers, and the sound of the zither gradually became more cheerful and pleasant. However, Xiao suddenly frowned. There was a faint fragrance in the air. It was different from the smell in the building just now, which made him alert. Seeing that Xiao was suddenly silent, Yu Qingxi subtly curved his eyebrows. A trace of shrewdness flashed through his eyes, and then he resumed his elegant and cordial look. "Lord, don't you feel that there's a fragrance in the room? I heard that this is the specialty of this restaurant. In order to relax the guests, there's a unique fragrance in the room. This fragrance has the effect of refreshing the mind. I stayed here for less than an hour just now, and I feel that I'm full of energy. The headache from last night's wind has unknowingly eased. This restaurant really lives up to its reputation." Listening to Yu Qingxi's seemingly unintentional introduction, Xiao let down some of his guard. "Lord, this is also the specialty of this restaurant. It's a gentleman's brew. Lord, please try it." Looking at the overly cordial Yu Qingxi, Xiao couldn't help but take a few more glances at the newly served wine. When Yu Qingxi handed over the wine cup, he tactfully refused. This prince is unwell all year round, and the imperial physician instructed me to abstain from drinking. Therefore, this prince can only apologize for Lord Yu's hospitality." Hearing this, Yu Qingxi revealed a disappointed expression. However, he didn't want to show it, so he forced a smile. "Since Prince Yi doesn't want to drink, then this one won't drink either. How can this one drink when the guest is drinking?" As he spoke, he ordered the wine to be taken away. Yu Qingxi's performance and expression just now made Xiao even more suspicious that something was added to the wine. His gaze towards Yu Qingxi couldn't help but turn cold. However, Yu Qingxi seemed to be unaware, and continued to greet him enthusiastically. Xiao then continued to practice taiji fists with him on the table. At this moment, while Xiao went to Yu Qingxi's invitation, Pang Zhijing was a little restless at the relay station. Previously, when she found out that she could unlock the exquisite lock and regain her freedom, she felt both happy and melancholy. These 2 days, her heart was a little adrift. She couldn't tell if it was because she couldn't bear to leave or because she wanted to leave as soon as possible. These indescribable emotions kept tangling in her heart. On the side, Luer watched her princess frown and sigh. She couldn't help but feel down along with the princess. Yesterday, the princess sat on the windowsill in a daze for an entire day. Today, an entire morning had passed, and she was still like this. She didn't know if it was because Lord Yu or Prince Yi had hurt the princess the day before yesterday that made her mood so bad. She didn't look as cheerful and energetic as before. However, she thought of another possibility. Her eyes lit up, and she immediately leaned in front of the princess. "Princess, is it because the wedding date is approaching that you're unconsciously agitated?" This servant heard that this is called anxiety before marriage. The closer the wedding date, the more obvious it will be. She only noticed the words "the wedding date is approaching" from Luer's words. She couldn't help but count the time. It turned out that in a dozen days, it would be the day of the political marriage. Because she had never taken the wedding date to heart, she thought that she would have run far away by then. However, when she heard Luer mention it, her heart couldn't help but beat violently. Was this the day that belonged to her and Xiao's wedding? These simple words made her eyes soften involuntarily, as well as yearning and longing. Chapter 1280. At this moment Luer noticed the change in her princess's expression. She was delighted and tried even harder to match her princess with Prince Yi. "Your Highness, people say that people who get this condition are worried that their husbands won't treat them well. But I think Prince Yi treats you very well. You don't know that the betrothal gifts from Prince Yi's mansion have filled the entire street, and you can't see the end of them. There are all kinds of rare treasures, silks and satins, as well as the best rare herbs. Those who laughed at the princess for choosing Prince Yi are now envious. They all say that the betrothal gifts cost all the wealth of Prince Yi's mansion. It's enough to show how sincere Prince Yi is to you." Pang Zhijing was stunned by Luer's incessant speech. "Betrothal gifts? What do you mean? How come I don't know about it?" Luer sighed and looked at her princess sadly. "The betrothal gifts were delivered yesterday, but you locked yourself in your room for a whole day and ignored everyone. So Lord Tori had the betrothal gifts put away first. It was a spectacular scene. I even went to watch. There were so many betrothal gifts that the whole courier station couldn't fit them. Lord Tori was so helpless that he borrowed a courtyard from the Emperor of Sichuan to put them in." Pang Zhijing opened her eyes wide. The whole courier station couldn't fit them? All of Prince Yi's mansion's wealth? What kind of concept was that? She once heard in a story that an emperor said to his sweetheart, "I'm willing to sacrifice the whole country to marry you. In this life, I only want you." The sun and the moon were eternal, and the vow would never change. Why did she suddenly think of this story? She remembered that a long time ago, she was so envious of such an unparalleled love. Now that she was implanted in such a plot, it was unreal. Luer thought she had convinced her princess, so she started to talk again. "In today's Sichuan and the capital city, who else can spend all of their wealth to marry a bride? Even those nobles don't have such courage, wealth, and ability. Prince Yi wouldn't do this if he didn't treat you with sincerity. I'm so envious that you can marry someone who loves you so much and treats you so well." Pang Zhijing was stunned by Luer's starry eyes. How did Xiao Ho treat her? If he asked himself honestly, ever since they met, other than when he wanted to use her, he had never treated her unfairly. Ever since the imperial decree for the marriage alliance was issued, he could be said to be obedient to her in every way, never letting her suffer any grievances. Now that he saw her alone in Xixian, so much dowry, it was actually because he was afraid that Nan Song would not be willing to spend more money on her, so he put up a front for her. A warm current suddenly surged in her heart, and slowly flowed through her entire body. The gloominess from before disappeared like smoke in thin air. There was only one day left. If she was still immersed in his words, then she was afraid that she wouldn't even be able to see him for the last time. She was very touched by the betrothal gift. But she had already decided to leave. She couldn't give up her freedom to pursue an illusory relationship. But before she left, she had to thank him properly. If it wasn't for him, she might have died on the way. Luo wanted to continue, but she saw her master suddenly stand up with a determined look on her face. Princess, you're... Pang Zhijing turned and smiled at her, sweeping away the haze of the past 2 days. She was pure and naughty. Let's go to Prince Yi's estate. Luo's eyes brightened. Did the princess think it through and stop the Cold War with Prince Yi? But before she finished thinking, the princess had already walked out. Luo immediately grabbed the handkerchief on the table and followed. Princess, wait for me. Xiao Ho, if I'm leaving, I'll say goodbye to you. Inside the restaurant, Xiao Ho and Yu Qingxi had already talked about the local customs of southern Song to Sichuan's culture and geography. Although they didn't like each other, they still admired each other's knowledge. However, Xiao Ho didn't forget the purpose of his visit today. He saw that Yu Qingxi was still leisurely chatting with him about everything. It was obvious that if he didn't bring it up himself, he wouldn't talk about it at all. Sure enough, people who knew secrets were always fearless. Xiao Ho didn't intend to beat around the bush with him. He smiled faintly and asked, Lord Yu, you mentioned on the invitation that the princess was poisoned. What's the matter? Yu Qingxi was holding a teacup to his lips. After hearing his words, his lips curled up imperceptibly. Finally couldn't hold it in anymore? He put down the teacup and said with a trace of regret, I heard about this by accident. It said that someone wanted to harm the princess, but didn't want her to die so easily. Therefore they used a slow-acting poison called life-severing. When the poison accumulates to a certain extent, it will take effect and torture the victim until they wish they were dead. Only then will they gradually lose their vitality. This method is extremely cruel. He found out about this from the Crown Prince's people. It was obvious that the Crown Prince wanted to use this method to leave the poison in the princess's body. After a long time, she would have married into Sichuan. At the same time, Southern Song would have enough strength to go to war. When the poison took effect and the princess died, it would be a good reason for them to send troops. Yu Qingxi couldn't help but admire the Crown Prince's method from the bottom of his heart. This was the so-called casting a long line to catch a big fish. Now he used this method to trick Xiao Ho into coming here. Of course, he didn't know how to detoxify the poison because the Crown Prince couldn't develop an antidote for this poison. Perhaps there was no antidote. Xiao Ho couldn't help but narrow his eyes. Although he was anxious, his voice was as calm as usual. Then does official you have any clues about the antidote? Yu Qingxi shook his head. No clues, but I do have a question. No clues? Xiao Ho immediately understood. Yu Qingxi was only using this information to lure him here. What was his purpose? Xiao Ho's gaze immediately turned cold. What question? Yu Qingxi played with the teacup in his hand. His humble and enthusiastic appearance slowly faded away. Soon his face was filled with ridicule. Your Highness Prince Yi, after sitting for so long, don't you feel uncomfortable? Or is your body so weak that you can't feel anything? He mocked mercilessly. Without a mask to hide his face, he revealed it to Xiao Ho. After hearing his words, Xiao Ho immediately wanted to stand up. However, his vision swayed and he couldn't stand steadily. He could only reach out to hold on to the corner of the table to prevent himself from falling. He raised his eyebrows and asked, What did you do to this prince? Chapter 1281. Although it was one thing to decide to come and see him, it was another to actually see him. She struggled in the carriage for a long time, feeling uneasy. That day his expression was so bad. It was obvious that he didn't want to see her again, now that she came to him of her own accord. Would she be ridiculed by him again? Didn't he say that everything about her had nothing to do with him, and that she was just an insignificant imperial consort? Her originally excited heart sank bit by bit at this moment. By the time she arrived at Prince Yi's mansion, her previous nervousness had disappeared. All that was left was guessing how he would feel when he saw her later. Forget it. Since she was already here, there was no point in thinking about it. Anyway, after today, she would have nothing to do with him anymore. She took a deep breath, then got off the carriage with Lu and went straight to the mansion's gate. Pang Zhijing had become a frequent visitor of the Prince Yi's mansion. She was Lord's most frequent visitor. In a dozen days, she would become the mistress of the Prince Yi's mansion. Therefore, the guards at the gate were very respectful and enthusiastic to her. They let her in directly without even announcing her arrival. These people's reactions were much better than the first time she entered the Prince Yi's mansion alone. Pang Zhijing nodded slightly at them, then strode in with Lu. After entering the Prince Yi's mansion, her eyes inadvertently glanced at the surrounding scenery. She suddenly had a strange feeling in her heart. Although this was Xiao's Prince Yi's mansion, after coming and going so many times, she found that she was very familiar with every blade of grass and every tree. She could even call out the names of the servant girls and manservants who walked by. Perhaps this had something to do with the small number of people in his mansion. This seemed to be her second home. It was much better than that cold relay station. Although Xiao always treated people with less sincerity, everyone in the Prince Yi's mansion was very loyal to him. Every time she came, everyone was very enthusiastic to her, as if they had already treated her as a member of the Prince Yi's mansion. It felt so good to have a home. She missed it so much. Just as she was trying hard to engrave the people and things here in her mind as she walked, the steward came up to her. "Princess, no one informed me of your sudden arrival. This old servant was not able to receive you in time. It is this old servant's fault." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the butler's self-criticism. She hurriedly stopped the butler from rambling on and asked directly, "Is Lord in the manor?" Hearing this, the butler looked at the little princess in front of him with an ambiguous smile, thinking that the wedding date was approaching and the two of them were about to get married. After clarifying their relationship, they could see each other every day. However, the little princess must have missed their lord very much. That was why she was so anxious to enter the residence to look for him at this time. It could be seen how deep the relationship between the two was. The steward couldn't help but feel moved and his eyes turned red. If Pang Zhijing knew what the butler was thinking, she would probably bleed. These days, not only did young men and women have a gossipy and fantasizing heart, but even the elderly couldn't avoid it. The steward said regretfully, "His Highness went out in the afternoon and hasn't returned yet. Why don't Princess go play in His Highness's courtyard for a while? His Highness should be back by dinner time." In the past, no one could enter Lord's courtyard, not to mention a personal servant girl or manservant. Perhaps he was the only one in the entire manor who could enter. However, it was different after the princess came. Lord never restricted her range of activities. Even the study, which had always been closed, could be freely entered by the princess. The butler sighed with emotion again. Lord treated the princess differently. He originally thought that he wouldn't be able to hold the little heir in his lifetime, but this wish might come true next year. Pang Zhijing was puzzled when she heard this. How could someone who usually didn't go out not be in the manor? However, at this time, she had no other choice but to stay in the manor and wait for his return. She had to wait for him today. Whether it was a confession or a farewell, more importantly, she wanted to see him one last time. Thus, when she turned to tell the butler to go about his business and ignore her, she saw the butler's gaze land on her stomach, as if something would jump out. She hurriedly coughed lightly and said, "Butler, I'm going to the courtyard first. If Lord returns, have someone inform me." The butler nodded repeatedly, and then watched their future princess consort's figure disappear into the distance. He wondered if it was time to buy some baby equipment. What should he buy? At this time, the atmosphere in the elegant room started to change. What did you do to Lord? Yu Qingxi opened her folding fan and said innocently, "This one didn't do anything." Is that so? It better be as you say. He couldn't use his inner energy as if it was wrapped up by something. Xiao was greatly shocked, but his expression was calm. Because he couldn't stand steadily, he sat back down. Yu Qingxi was puzzled when she saw him like this. He was clearly drugged, so why was he still able to stay awake? Usually, someone with such a weak constitution wouldn't be able to control himself. Perhaps he didn't breathe in enough pollen. With this thought, Yu Qingxi dispelled the idea of leaving immediately, and continued to accompany him to kill time. What Yu Qingxi didn't know was that Xiaoho's body was even healthier than a normal person's. His weakness was only his appearance. However, the drug had already taken effect in Xiaoho's body, but he was able to restrain it. Lord, this one actually has something that is extremely puzzling. Would the Lord please dispel this one's confusion? Faced with Yu Qingxi's deliberately mystifying act, Xiao tugged the corner of his mouth. Ask away. Yu Qingxi smiled. Then this one won't be polite. The princess reputation in Southern Blue is so bad that it can be said that no one is willing to befriend her. Back then, she always followed behind this one and couldn't be shaken off no matter how hard I tried. Moreover, she often used underhanded methods to get close to me. Why are you so protective of her, and even agreed to a marriage alliance? Could it be that the Lord has a special fetish for women with this kind of character? Otherwise, with the Lord's status, what kind of woman can't he want? Why would he want someone with a bad reputation and bad character? Have you said enough? A cold glint appeared in his eyes as his elegant features burst forth with a suppressive might. This aura caused Yu Qingxi's breathing to become chaotic. What a powerful feeling. He immediately looked straight at Xiao. At this moment, he had a weak appearance, as if everything he saw just now was an illusion. Yu Qingxi sneered. Trash was trash. What kind of aura was there to speak of? He must have seen wrongly just now to see killing intent in his eyes. At this moment, Xiao calmly looked at him and said with a mocking tone, "She liked you for so many years and didn't hesitate to give up so much for you, only to receive this kind of result. If she saw your face right now, she might regret being blind all those years." Yu Qingxi's face turned malevolent from his words. "Xiao, what do you have to be proud of? Whether or not you can walk out of here alive tonight is still a mystery." Chapter 1282. It was already evening. Because it was summer, the days were long and the nights were short. The sun was still hanging high in the sky. Because not everyone could enter his courtyard, Luo was given a day off by her to find someone to play with. She would bring her along when she was about to leave. Luo agreed happily. When she left, she even looked at her ambiguously. This made Pang Zhijing very depressed. The butler was like this, and Luo was also like this. Were they in cahoots? She smiled and shook her head. Then she entered his courtyard alone. Once a person was in the mood of parting, they would be very sensitive to the things around them. For example, at this moment, when she stood in the courtyard, she felt that whether it was the grass, the trees, the flowers, the leaves, or the dust in the air, they all had his unique scent. He was like the setting sun, pouring down on this piece of land. Every place was tainted with his breath, his smell, as if his figure was everywhere. A faint bitter smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Her life, her memories, were also corroded by him in this way. He was pervasive and meticulous. So much so that she did not know how long it would take to wash away the traces he left in her life. They had been together for less than a year, but she had to use 10 years, decades, or even a lifetime to forget him. Forgetting a person did not depend on how long it took to like or fall in love with him. It depended on how many traces that person left in your life. However, to her, this deal was really not worth it. But what could she do? The heart could not be controlled. Falling in love with someone was not something she could decide. If people could control their own emotions, then how could there be so many love and hatred in the world? So many enemies and resentful couples? Unknowingly, she walked to a small flower bed. This place was in the corner. If one did not observe carefully, they would not notice it. This small flower bed was probably 10 feet long and wide. Some flowers she did not know were planted in it. There were purple, blue, white and different varieties, but they all looked very beautiful. Cha! She seemed to have stepped on something. She moved her foot away and found that it was a small shovel. She looked around and found that there was also a water bottle and nutrients. Xiao was basically the only one in this courtyard. Then did he take care of this flower bed himself? She squatted down and picked up the shovel. She imagined him using his fair and slender fingers to hold this down-to-earth shovel, and then focusing on weeding the small flower bed. He looked so calm and gentle, and she couldn't help but feel her eyes move. Suddenly, she felt that he was like a secret castle. At first glance, she could not see his full appearance, and every time she got closer, she would discover a surprise and a side of him that no one knew. She remembered that when she was at Grandma Wren's house, the person who should not have done any household chores actually lowered himself to roll up his sleeves and light the fire by the stove. With this premise, she was not surprised that he planted flowers. What kind of person was he? Even though she had liked him for so long, she couldn't accurately describe it with words. He was usually gentle and refined, and his smile was filled with affection. When scheming against others, he remained calm and collected. When she was angry, her smile was gentle, but her eyes were as cold as ice. When he was in a good mood, his eyes were shining. He would despise her for being noisy and annoyed that she was asking for trouble. When she was happy, his poisonous tongue was merciless. When she was hurt, he silently gave her medicine. When she was sad, he lent her his shoulder. When she was angry, he loved to tease her. This kind of person that you felt was gentle yet fickle, fickle yet passionate, passionate yet emotionless, was like the most unpredictable cloud in the world. You never knew what kind of form he would appear in front of you in the next moment. And because of this, you wanted to get closer to him, understand him, and hug him. No matter which one it was, he was the loneliest one in her heart. She had heard people say that people who stayed together because they did not understand each other and separated because they understood each other. At that time, she felt that this sentence was quite reasonable. Until today, she realized that the more she understood Xiao, the more mysterious he was. She could not help but want to get closer to him. He had such a powerful and mysterious ability. He was like a whirlpool. Once you were sucked in, you would never be able to get out. But now, she had to restrain herself and not step into that whirlpool. Because if she did not get a response, she could only be consigned to eternal damnation and be smashed to pieces. Can't walk out of here alive? Xiao narrowed his eyes dangerously and looked at Yu Qingxi with a torch-like gaze. Yu Qingxi was frightened by his gaze, but he quickly regained his senses. Xiao was now a fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered by him. He quickly regained his confidence. He sneered. I've drugged this room with heart confusion powder. Once you breathe it in, your mind will start to become lax, and then, he laughed lowly with a wretched tone, and an expression of watching a good show appeared on his face. The words that Yu Qingxi didn't finish were probably not anything good, but it was also because of her explanation that Xiao felt an inexplicable heat rising from his dantian, and slowly sweeping through his entire body. If he wasn't able to use his internal energy to suppress it, he was afraid that his mind would have already scattered like what Yu Qingxi said. He gripped the corner of the table tightly, and looked at Yu Qingxi with an icy gaze. So the life-severing poison is only a pretense. Your true motive is to kill this prince? Yes, it's just an excuse. I didn't expect you to really fall for it. TSK. Princey, oh Princey, why are you treating Pang Zhijing so differently? Yu Qingxi shook his head and continued. She can even abandon me, the person who has pursued her for many years, like a worn-out shoe. How long do you think you can stay in her heart, someone who just appeared in her life? Don't be fooled by how she seems to be very affectionate. She's actually the most heartless one. So don't be silly. You won't have a good ending with her. Xiao laughed lowly, and then slowly raised his eyes under Yu Qingxi's puzzled gaze. His gaze was sharp and the corner of his mouth held a sneer. Then why are you treating this prince like this now? Could it be that you didn't care when she was pursuing you? But when she doesn't want you anymore, you're rushing to stick to her? Lord, your actions are very shameless. As if someone had stepped on her sore spot, Yu Qingxi's expression was both embarrassed and angry. It could be said that she was angry out of embarrassment. But after being in the political arena for so many years, she could more or less control her emotions. At least she had to maintain her poise on the surface. He took a deep breath and said with contempt and a hint of anger in his words, I admit that I don't want her to have an easy time when I see her happy and complacent. I haven't avenged Ro, or for the matter of her plotting against her, so I set you up to embarrass her so that she can't get married in the future. Because such a woman doesn't deserve happiness. Xiaoho's face grew darker and darker. However, at this moment, Yu Qingxi seemed to have discovered something extraordinary. She suddenly sized him up with a smile. Princey, you're so angry. Don't tell me you've fallen in love with that ruffian and uncultured Pang Zhijing? Xiaoho instantly widened his eyes. This sentence was like a stick that knocked away all his anger, and directly hit the door in the depths of his heart. Then there was a loud bang. Chapter 1283. The afterglow of the setting sun finally disappeared from the horizon, and night fell. Lanterns were hung in front of each house, illuminating the path home. Pang Zhijing stayed in the yard from evening until the sun set. Finally, she slept on the table and woke up, but she still didn't see anyone. She couldn't help being a bit puzzled. Although this Xiaoho was full of evil tricks, he never stayed out late. He stayed in the palace and didn't go out if he could. So why hadn't he come back yet? Could it be that he was held back by some important matter? Or did he meet with some danger? The former was possible, but as for the latter... She shook her head. It was good enough that he didn't scheme against others. How could such a smart person be held back by others? However, she didn't know that this time, he had indeed been held back by others. Moreover, he had been schemed against by others and the source was her. She paced around the room to kill time. She carefully and seriously looked at all the decorations in the room. Now, she could even recite the entire room's decorations with her eyes closed. The reason was that it was too boring. But there was one thing that she was curious about. For a proud man like Xiaoho, why would he put pink decorations in the room? For example, pink bed curtains, pink bead curtains, and pink tea mats. She didn't think that when she came here before, she didn't see such strange decorations. Wasn't this suitable for a little girl? It was hard to imagine why Xiaoho would put them in the room, but it looked quite pleasing to the eye. It was much better than the cold and plain color from before. After admiring it for a while, she still felt bored. The wait felt endless and her heart was anxious, making her feel more and more impatient. How about she go back first? But like this, he would go to Hugua Temple tomorrow and she wouldn't have time to send him off. Then wouldn't she not be able to see him one last time? No, she couldn't just leave like this. The meeting between the two of them was full of drama, and was caught off guard. Their parting couldn't be anticlimactic. However, she waited for another half an hour. The stars were already out but he still hadn't come back. It looked like he wouldn't be coming back tonight. She stomped her feet gloomily. This Xiaoho didn't go out earlier or later, but just had to disappear at this time. It was too infuriating. She looked around the room and suddenly stopped at a corner. She couldn't help but walk over. There was a table near the window with the 4 treasures of the study on it. She picked up the brush and pondered for a while. Then, she walked around the table, and sat down on the chair to grind the ink for herself. Since he couldn't say it out loud, he would just write it down on paper. Perhaps those unspeakable words could be better expressed in words. After she finished grinding the ink, she spread out a piece of paper on the table. She picked up the brush and pondered for a moment before dipping it in the ink and slowly writing. Fortunately, when she was young, she learned calligraphy from her grandfather for a period of time. She was also sent to the children's palace by her parents for a few winter and summer vacations. Writing a letter was still manageable. Although her handwriting was not the most beautiful, at least it was not ugly. When she started writing, memories flooded her mind. From the time they first met until now, it covered all the interactions between the two of them. She just realized that there were so many things she wanted to say to him in her heart. However, there were too many things she wanted to say, but she couldn't write them all down. Unrequited love was a pantomime. If she said it out loud, it would become a tragedy. She didn't want to give him any more trouble at the end. When they came, they had to be clean. When they left, they had to be clean as well. Thousands of words, thousands of words, thousands of words, thousands of words. Then, all that was left was to take care. Under the night sky, the lanterns on every floor of the restaurant were hung up. It was like a dazzling pagoda emitting colorful light. The light shone in through the window, enveloping the two of them in a gorgeous halo. Yu Qingxi saw Xiaoho's expression suddenly change after she finished speaking. His face was a little ugly. As expected, I guessed it. It turns out that you really like that silly girl. Haha. Prince Yi's taste is really unique. Xiaoho still hadn't recovered from what she said before. Fell in love with her? How was that possible? But why couldn't he refute Yu Qingxi's words? He couldn't even say that she was talking nonsense. Could it be that he was really like what Yu Qingxi said and had feelings for her? But no matter what the reason was, his words slandering the little rascal at this moment made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Lord Yu, I think you just hate her because you can't have her. That's why you want to break us up. You're just a Xiaoho's sarcasm made Yu Qingxi's anger reach its peak. It could be said that he was guilty and angry. What nonsense are you talking about? My fiancé is Ro. It's impossible for me to like that uneducated princess. But after he finished speaking, Xiaoho still had a sarcastic look. He was about to go crazy. But when he glanced at Xiaoho's abnormal blush from the corner of his eyes and his clenched fists, he suddenly smiled evilly. Lord, are you having a hard time holding it in? Don't worry, you'll soon have sex. Today, I invited the Lord over because I wanted to give the Lord a taste of meat before the Lord's wedding. But he didn't care about Xiaoho's sharp gaze at all and continued proudly. But I don't know if your weak body can withstand the grace of so many beauties. I'm very curious. Xiaoho looked at him angrily, but the strength in his body was gradually draining away. If he hadn't bitterly supported himself, he probably wouldn't even be able to maintain a sitting posture. Yu Qingxi stood up and looked at his painful appearance with a carefree smile. Xiaoho, do you know what kind of drug you've been poisoned with? What a vicious mind. Xiaoho asked himself if he could do this. When Yu Qingxi saw his deflated appearance, she felt even more carefree. She walked towards the door, and when she was about to walk out, she turned back and said proudly, however, it's not like there's no way to cure the poison. That's the blood of a virgin. However, you won't have the chance to walk out of this room. None of the women here are virgins, so you should give up struggling. After saying that, he laughed and turned to go out. When the door was closed, the women playing music behind the curtain put down their instruments one after another, lifted the curtain, and all of them leaned toward Xiaoho. Chapter 1284. The smell of the rouge powder immediately surrounded him, causing Xiaoho's surging qi and blood to become even more chaotic in his body, making him feel even more uncomfortable. He couldn't help but miss the clean fragrance on little rascal's body. Thinking of this, he felt his body become even hotter. Those women had long been drooling over his extraordinary appearance. His voice and appearance were both beautiful, like the autumn moon in a frozen pot, making people unable to help but look up and want to appear before him. At this moment he couldn't move, so he could only let them touch him. Because when they were playing the music just now, the sound had covered Xiaoho and Yu Qingxi's conversation, so they didn't know Xiaoho's identity at all. Each of them only thought of him as a benefactor from an aristocratic family. Young master, seeing that you're sweating, you must be very hot. This servant will help you take off your clothes, and you won't feel hot anymore. Young master, this wine is the treasure of our shop, please try it. Young master, what kind of position do you like? We sisters can serve you properly. These vulgar words came out of these women's mouths, but it sounded like they were flirting, and they didn't feel ashamed at all. Xiaoho closed his eyes tightly, as if he didn't care about these people. He focused on circulating the inner strength in his body. When his clothes fell to the ground, he suddenly opened his eyes. When those women saw the cold light in his eyes, they couldn't help but take a step back. However, it was already too late. A pocket-sized dagger appeared in Xiao's hand, and with a wave of his hand, a red mark appeared on the white and tender necks of the women who were singing and laughing just now. Their eyes widened, but they couldn't speak anymore. Not long later, a large group of people lay on the ground, no longer making a sound. After dealing with the crisis in front of him, Xiao spat out a large mouthful of blood. This poison would seal a cultivator's 8 extraordinary meridians. He forcefully used his inner strength, so he suffered a backlash, and the poison spread even faster. He leaned against the edge of the table, barely supporting his body to not fall. His men had probably been dealt with by Yu Qingxi, otherwise, they would have appeared by now. Yu Qingxi must have sent people to guard the outside, so there was no way out of the room. His gaze swept towards the window. Through the unlatched window, the dazzling lights from outside shone in, making one feel a little dizzy. However, this was the best place to escape. Fortunately, Yu Qingxi thought that his body was weak and that it was impossible for him to walk out of this room. So she didn't send anyone to stand guard outside the window. He opened the window with difficulty, and after clearly seeing the situation below, he leaped out. Xiao leaned against a small alley not far from the restaurant, panting heavily. Being able to leave the restaurant was already an arrow at the end of its flight. At this moment, even walking was difficult for him. He wanted to ignite the signal to summon his subordinates, but he found that his coat was left in the restaurant, and the signal in his sleeve seemed to have fallen off when he jumped out of the window. There was nothing on him that could be used. The cold wall made his mind clear a little. He looked at the dark alley, as if he couldn't see the end. He couldn't help but slowly curl up the corners of his mouth, revealing a self-deprecating smile. After so many years, he was once again forced into a desperate situation. That year, he said that he wouldn't let himself fall into this kind of predicament again, but he raised his head to look at the night sky. The stars and moon competed with each other in splendor, and the clouds were clear for thousands of miles. Didn't they say that there was a deity 3 feet above one's head? But why hadn't those evildoers received their retribution? Could it be that all the grievances had to be buried deep and couldn't be cleared? His expression was sorrowful. Cough, cough. He clutched his chest and bent down in pain. A large mouthful of blood soaked the ground beside his feet. At this moment, a figure timidly approached him and cautiously asked, "Young master, what's wrong? Do you need help?" Xiao instantly raised his head and looked at the person standing not far away with a cold glint in his eyes. When he saw that it was a delicate and pretty young lady, he then relaxed his body and leaned against the wall. That young lady saw that his temperament was outstanding, and his posture was tall and straight, like a destitute rich family's young master. She couldn't help but muster up her courage and walked over. "Do you need me to find a physician for you?" The young lady's body fragrance wafted over, causing the surging heat in his body to surge violently. He was almost unable to resist it. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he stared fixedly at the young lady. Virgin blood? Looking at her attire, she should be an unmarried young lady. The hand that was pressing on his chest suddenly reached out to grab her shoulder, and then heavily threw her against the wall behind him. The young lady cried out in alarm. "Scream again and I'll kill you." As soon as the threatening words fell, that young lady firmly bit her lips, not daring to let out the slightest bit of sound. Seeing such bright eyes, Xiao was a little upset. He directly ordered, "Take off your clothes." That young lady's tears fell when she heard that. "Young master, I beg you to be magnanimous. I was just passing by to get medicine for my family. Seeing that you seem to be feeling unwell, I came over to inquire. I didn't mean to offend you. I beg you let me go." The young lady's tears suddenly made a scene of the past appear in front of his eyes. "Xiao, don't think that no one will punish you for the bad things you've done in this life." A charming young lady appeared in front of him and lightly snorted while pointing at his nose. "Let me tell you, before you walk to the bridge of helplessness and prepare to reincarnate, Mengpu will make you drink a bowl of soup to wash away your memories. Then, the bad things you've done in this life will be borne by the person you care about the most in the next life. At that time, you will be sad and helpless, questioning the heavens why you're not the one suffering. You don't know the reason, but you can only watch as the person you love the most is tortured. This is the reincarnation of the heavens, karma. The scene in front of him was taken away, leaving only the young lady who was trembling in fear. At this time, she saw that he was as gloomy as the messenger of hell, and thought that she had angered him again. Her hands trembled, and she silently cried as she tried to undo her clothes. But at this time, a suppressed voice came from above. "Go, don't appear in front of me." The young lady's hands stiffened. She didn't know if she was hearing things, but the strength on her shoulder was released. The tall man in front of her turned around and leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. His expression was one of pain and forbearance. She didn't dare to stay any longer, and immediately ran into the alley, as if there was a ghost chasing after her. At this time, hearing the sound of panicked footsteps getting further and further away, Xiao reached out to cover his eyes, blocking the light of the stars and moon. The blood dripping from the corner of his mouth became more and more red. Just now he had given up a chance to live. Just because of the few words that little rascal said at the beginning? He had never believed in those supernatural beings with monstrous strength. Normally, he would only treat them as nonsense. He wasn't a good person. The blood on his hands had long been stained countless times. One more bad thing or one less to him didn't make any difference. But when she said that the bad things he had done in this life would be borne by the person he cared about the most in the next life, he could no longer do anything to that young lady. He suddenly felt that he couldn't take this risk. He would rather believe it than not. Not even the slightest possibility, because he couldn't bear to let her be tortured. Chapter 1285. Inside the King of England's residence, Water Spirit handed over the latest intelligence report and said, "This subordinate has found out who was in charge of the army when Old Master Chu led the army. I didn't expect it to be someone from the Fu family. His name is Fu Kuan. Although he is not a direct descendant, he is very close to the right chief minister's faction. When this subordinate was investigating, I found something very strange. Back then, all the people led by Old Master Chu died on the battlefield. Only that person survived. In the end, he was promoted to an official, and is now sitting in the position of the military governor of the border." Xiao glanced at the information and frowned slightly. This prince has always suspected that there was something fishy about what happened back then. Otherwise, there would not have been such a misjudgment during the pursuit of victory, causing the army to die on the battlefield. Although this prince did not see or participate in that battle back then, after looking at all aspects of the battle, I feel that General Chu is a rare general. If there had not been an accident at that time, he would not have taken that route to intercept the army. The General Chu that Xiao was talking about was Father Chu. During this period, he had studied the battle back then and analyzed Father Chu's battle strategy. He found that Father Chu already had the demeanor of a general at a young age. His strategy was very flexible, and he always caught the enemy off guard. In those 10 battles, he basically did not lose. Moreover, he could see that Father Chu did not become arrogant because of the smooth journey. Instead, he was more stable. How could such a cautious person know that there was a tiger in the mountain, but still go to the tiger's mountain, and lead the army into a land of despair? Water Spirit and Hualing, Turin, and the others present looked at each other. In the courtyard, Father Chu was still clamoring for Mu Ling to make a giant kite for him. It was hard to imagine that such an innocent and naive Father Chu was a mighty general, who commanded the battlefield back then. It was true that one could not judge a book by its cover. They thought, if Father Chu did not become like this today, how mighty would he be now? Then, would their little princess consort not be discriminated against by others? And wouldn't their master have another helper behind him? However, they felt that it was more likely that the young princess consort was beautiful and had a good family background. Thus, His Majesty could not betroth her to their master. Who knows, when the time came, the master would be given an ugly monster. That would be terrible. Therefore, this might be fate making a fool of people. But it was also fated and arranged by fate. Apart from this, what else did you find? Xiao looked up and asked Water Spirit. Water Spirit immediately nodded. She really did find something. Old Master Chu was defeated 15 years ago. Back then, many of the Luo clan's disciples were in the army. The Luo family? Xiao Su frowned slightly. He was somewhat puzzled. Water Spirit explained. Master might not know about what happened 15 years ago. At that time, Master was going through a great change. However, it should be traced back to 21 years ago when a major extermination occurred. The Luo family was the maternal family of the third prince's mother. At that time, the Luo family was found to have colluded with others to overthrow the court and betray Sichuan. When His Majesty found out, he decreed that the entire family be confiscated and beheaded. However, the younger children were banished to the borders, and the girls were brought to the palace as slaves. But for some reason, the young miss of the Luo family, who was already 16 years old, was also sent to the palace. She did not know if this matter had anything to do with Chu Machen's father, but based on her many years of experience as the leader of the pigeons and her keen senses, she faintly felt that this matter was not trivial. After receiving her master's signal, she continued, "No one knows which army those children were sent to at the borders." However, 6 years later, Chu Machen's army was completely wiped out. When he cleaned up the battlefield, he found the corpses of those children. Moreover, the entire family was there. It can be said that now, other than the third prince, there is no one else who is related to the Luo family. These words suddenly caused the atmosphere to become heavy. Although 15 years ago he had been burned by a fire and had been sealed away for a long time, before that, he had seen the Luo family's glory and status in the Western Pavilion. But now the Luo family had almost been wiped out. He didn't know if this was intentional, or if it was really as Shui Ling had said, they had colluded with the enemy and committed treason, reaping what they sowed. No matter whether these two matters are related or not, you must continue to investigate until the truth comes to light, Xiao Su said in a low voice. Water Spirit obeyed the order. It was very difficult to obtain evidence about what happened 15 years ago. The two people who survived were either from the Fu family, or had lost their minds. They could only investigate bit by bit. Xiao Su saw the tiredness on Water Spirit's face, and knew that she had not had a good rest. He could not help but say, "It was a long time ago, so it will be difficult to obtain evidence. You don't have to be too hard on yourself." Water Spirit smiled when she heard this. "Master, you know that this is the only fun I have left. If you take it away from me, I will have nothing left to live for." Everyone present revealed a trace of sadness when they heard her words. If Feng Ling was still here, if he was still here, in the quiet courtyard. Pang Zhijing felt that her entire hand was about to be crippled when she wrote a full piece of paper. It had been a long time since she had used a brush, and it was something that had been used for so long. As she dried the ink, she shook her wrist to relieve her tiredness. Then she picked up the paper and gently blew on it. She looked at the content on the paper, and suddenly felt that she was going to die of nausea from writing this. It was like a wife telling her husband before a long journey. She felt goosebumps all over her body. Should she write another one? But when she thought of her wrist, she immediately dismissed the idea. Forget it. Anyway, the one who would be disgusted by the nausea would be Xiao Ho. By the time he wanted to find someone to settle the score, she would already be far away. Thinking of this, she could not help but chuckle. She was like a child who had secretly done something bad, and then hid away. It was very exciting, very exciting. The ink on the paper was almost dry. She found a letter and sealed it, then looked around for a place where she could hide it. She could not let him find the letter so quickly. Otherwise, if he became suspicious, she would not be able to leave tomorrow. So she picked up the books on his table and stuffed it into one of the books. Then she covered the other books. She clapped her hands and pursed her lips into a smile. When you see it, it will depend on your luck. Looking at the thick book again, she turned around and walked out of the room. But when she stepped on the stairs, she could not help but stop and look around the courtyard. She had to leave. The longer she looked, the more traces she would leave. It would be harder to erase them in the future. She could not help pursing her lips and lowering her head. She quickened her steps, wanting to leave the courtyard. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Just when she was 1 step away from the courtyard's arched door, She suddenly stopped and looked towards the wall covered in purple wisteria. She saw a figure standing under the wall covered in purple flowers and green leaves. The night wind blew up his blue robe and it fluttered in the air, but it gave her a kind of illusion of pain. You are Xiao? Her eyes widened. Chapter 1286. When her voice fell, she could clearly feel the other person's body trembling slightly. His body was slightly bent and one hand was placed on his chest as if he was in pain. The moonlight shone through the gaps in the leaves onto his face. His gentle and picturesque brows and handsome figure. Who else could it be other than Xiao? After waiting for an entire day, she finally saw him. Peng Zhijing's stomach was filled with anger as she immediately turned around and walked towards him. She angrily stomped on the ground with a bang-bang sound. Xiao, you're too much. I've waited for you for so long and I don't want to wait any longer. I was about to leave when you appeared. I really feel that you're my nemesis, always going against me. Before she could finish her words, she was sternly cut off by him. Stand there, don't come over. Her anger was stifled by his words. She couldn't vent it out, neither could she vent it out. It was as if the person who should be angry was her, but in the end, she was still the one being scolded. She pretended not to care as she curled her lips. If I don't want to go over, then I won't go over. Do you think I want to see you that much? You don't want to see me? The voice in the dark suddenly turned threatening. Peng Zhijing was stunned. What's wrong with this person? It was as if she said she didn't want to see him, he would pounce over and tear her apart. Why was this person so eccentric today? She put her hands on her hips and unhappily said, Then what do you want? You won't let me go near, and you won't let me say I don't want to see you. So contradictory. Speaking up to here, her voice suddenly became downcast. Xiao, your thoughts are so hard to guess. I've always guessed wrong. I give up. I don't want to guess anymore. The evil fire in his body was rampaging everywhere, invading his blood. All his blood vessels felt like they were about to burst. Moreover, when he heard her voice, his entire body felt like it was on fire. Even his breathing became scorching hot. He couldn't help but want to get closer to her, but his rationality told him that he couldn't. However, her downcast voice was like an invisible thread that wrapped around his heart, tightening inch by inch and hurting inch by inch. Then don't guess anymore. You're so stupid, you'll never be able to guess. He lowered his voice and tried his best to sound as normal as possible. No one knew what kind of torment his body was enduring and what kind of torment his heart was enduring. Hearing him say this, her originally dejected mood became even more desolate. She tugged at her sleeves to hide her sadness and pretended not to care. Tizke, do you think this princess likes to stick a warm face to a cold face? I'm a fool, not stupid. I'm not as cunning and smart as a fox like you. In the future, you'll go your own way and I'll go mine. In the future, we'll never see each other again. Is that so? Xiao chuckled. That would be for the best. He could already feel the poison spreading in his body. In another 2 hours, his body would explode and he would die. Thinking of this, the heat on his body subsided a little, and he became a little more clear-headed. At this moment he heard her say, Xiao, you're really too hateful, too hateful, too hateful. Hearing her gnashing her teeth but unable to do anything, his heart suddenly softened. The corner of his mouth slightly curved, but there was a fishy sweetness in his throat. He immediately used his qi to suppress it, to prevent her from seeing him in such a sorry state. However, when he used his qi, the qi in his body became even more chaotic. Since you're so hateful, then don't stay. Go back. He said these words with difficulty, not only because of his lack of strength, but also because he couldn't bear it in his heart. However, in order to make her leave, he could only harden his heart. When Peng Zhijing heard this, her face heated up. It wasn't because she was shy, but because she was embarrassed and embarrassed. The other party already didn't want to see you and couldn't wait for you to disappear immediately. What else could she hope for? What face did she have to continue wasting time with him? She pursed her lips and endured the sourness in her eyes. Her voice was slightly nasal as she said, Okay, I'll leave. Don't think of me appearing in front of you again. Xiaoho's lips moved, but he couldn't say a word. The shadow cast by the wall covered the expression on his face. No one could see the intense sadness and loneliness in his eyes. Pang Zhijing saw him standing there indifferently, and her heart felt as if it had been hollowed out by someone. It hurt so much that it was numb. When she thought about how she was going to leave him tomorrow, and how it ended up like this, she wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. However, she clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her flesh, leaving rows of crescent moon marks on her palms. She resisted the urge to go up and question him. After so many days, did he really not have any feelings for her at all? But what could she do even if she asked? She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she had already restrained all the pain. She looked at him deeply and then slowly said, "Xiaoho, you have to take care. In the days when I'm not around." After she finished speaking, she didn't wait for his response and turned to leave. Her footsteps were quick, afraid that she wouldn't be able to resist turning back. Xiaoho pursed his lips and didn't say a word. He watched her back gradually disappear into the darkness, and then listened to her voice slowly fade away until it could no longer be heard. Only then did he release all the strength in his body and lean against the wall. He held onto the wall with one hand to prevent himself from falling. At this moment, his face revealed a pained expression. When he returned to the courtyard and found her, he should have avoided her. However, the moment he saw her, he suddenly couldn't bear to leave. His heart was suddenly filled with joy, and he wanted to see her and take a good look at her. Whether or not this poison could be cured was still unknown, but he was afraid that he wouldn't have the chance in the future. So he could also be afraid. Before he was 6 years old, he lived in fear, afraid that his mother would suddenly abandon him and leave him one day. When he was 6 years old, his mother finally left him alone in the world. At that time, he thought that he had nothing left to lose, and that there was no need to be afraid. However, just now, he realized that he still had something left to lose. He still had a heart to lose. The taste of fear could be so bitter and painful. He grabbed his clothes and gave a low laugh, but it was filled with desolation. He struggled to stand up. He couldn't submit to fate like this. He had to find the medicine to suppress the poison. He wouldn't just sit and wait for death. Even if the heavens wanted him to die, he would fight it out with them. He knew his own body better than anyone else. He had already reached the limit of his endurance. If he waited any longer, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself anymore. Just as he clutched his chest and was about to stagger back to his room, a person suddenly appeared in front of him. His brows immediately furrowed. This medicine lowered his guard so much that he didn't even notice a living person approaching him. However, when he raised his head and saw the person standing under the moonlight, he instantly froze on the spot. He looked at her in disbelief and involuntarily asked, "Didn't you leave? Why did you come back?" You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.